You walk into a crowded coffee shop. There's one table left. Another customer sees it too. For a split second, your eyes meet. Neither of you speaks. But somehow, in that silent moment, a decision happens. Do you walk faster? Pretend not to notice? Offer it to them and stand awkwardly with your drink? This isn't just social awkwardness. It's a game, and you're already playing. Game theory is the science of strategy. It's about understanding situations where your choices depend on someone else's choices and theirs depend on yours. It's not about chess or poker, though those are great examples. It's about war and peace, business deals, traffic jams, dating apps, even parenting. Anywhere there are multiple players with goals and options, game theory is there, hiding under the surface. Here's the key idea. In a game, you're not alone. Your payoff, the outcome you get, depends not just on what you do, but on what others do too. Think of two rival companies setting prices. If both keep prices high, they profit. If one slashes prices, they steal customers. If both slash, profits crash for everyone. Each company's best move depends entirely on the others. Or imagine two countries in a nuclear standoff. Neither wants war, but if one disarms first, they're vulnerable. So they wait, and suddenly the fate of millions balances on unspoken strategies. But it's not all boardrooms and battlefields. You use game theory every day when you merge into traffic, when you negotiate bedtime with a stubborn toddler, when you decide whether to text back immediately or wait and seem less eager. The rules aren't written down, but they're there. And the stakes feel higher than they are because these games tap into the most ancient parts of your brain: survival, reputation, belonging. The beauty of game theory is that it gives us a lens. It shows us the invisible rules and patterns shaping decisions all around us. But here's the first uncomfortable truth. Game theory assumes players are rational, that they calculate options, weigh payoffs, and choose optimally. In reality, people are messy, emotional, distracted, often irrational, and yet even our irrationality can be predicted. So as we step into this journey, remember this: game theory isn't about winning. It's about understanding the game you're already in and seeing moves you never knew existed, because once you see the games, you can never unsee them. Next, we'll break down the parts of every game, the players, strategies, and payoffs, so you can start spotting them everywhere. Players, strategies, payoffs. You're standing at a busy intersection. The pedestrian light is flashing red. Cars are slowing down, but one is still coming fast. You glance at the driver. He glances at you. Who goes first? In that split second, there are only three elements at play: you, him, and the possible outcomes. This is the essence of every game in game theory: players, strategies, and payoffs. Strip away the noise, and this is all that remains. First, the players. Players aren't just people. They can be companies, nations, animals, even algorithms, anyone or anything that makes choices in pursuit of goals. In a game of poker, the players sit across the table. In a price war, the players are rival corporations. In evolution, the players might be predator and prey, each adapting their strategy to survive. Second, the strategies. A strategy is a plan of action. It's not just one move. It's a complete roadmap for every possible situation in the game. In rock, paper, scissors, your strategies are simple. Pick one option each round. But in chess, your strategy might be aggressive opening moves, defensive mid-game, and end-game traps. In life, strategies get even more complex. Do you negotiate hard for a raise or play the long game and build goodwill? Do you confess feelings to someone now or wait to see if they make the first move? Each option carries risks and rewards. Finally, the payoffs. This is where the consequences of choices play out. Payoffs can be money, power, reputation, survival, even happiness. In game theory, they're often simplified into numbers. A higher number means a better outcome. For example, two companies compete. If both keep prices high, each earns 5. If one cuts prices while the other holds, the cutter earns 10, the holder earns 0. If both cut, they each earn 2. This simple table, a payoff matrix, shows how intertwined their fates are. Your payoff isn't just about your choice, it's about theirs too. Here's where it gets fascinating. Many games have no perfect strategy. Your best move depends on what you think others will do and what they think you'll do. It's a loop of prediction, like two drivers trying to guess if the other will yield. But here's the catch. Most real-life games aren't one-off events. We meet the same players again and again. Our strategies evolve. Our payoffs shift as trust builds or erodes. And as we'll see, even simple games can spiral into stunning complexity when repeated over time. Zero-sum versus non-zero-sum. Imagine two kids fighting over the last slice of cake. One grabs it and the other gets nothing. That's a zero-sum game. One's gain is the other's loss. Now imagine they split the cake. Or better yet, they agree to bake a bigger one together. Suddenly, there's more cake for both. That's a non-zero-sum game. Everyone can win or lose together. At first glance, the difference seems obvious, but in the real world, it's not. Because most games aren't purely one or the other. They're hybrids, shifting depending on how the players act. Picture this. Two rival companies dominate a market. If one cuts prices to steal customers, it's zero-sum. Every dollar gained by one is lost by the other. But if they both innovate, growing the market, they create value for everyone. Or take climate change. Nations compete for resources and economic growth, classic zero-sum thinking. But global warming is non-zero-sum. If countries fail to cooperate, everyone suffers. This is why some of the biggest human challenges, war, poverty, pandemics, are non-zero-sum. Cooperation lifts all boats. Defection sinks them all. But here's where it gets tricky. Humans evolved in small groups, fighting for limited resources. Our instincts are tuned for zero-sum games, outcompete, outlast, win. This worked when food was scarce, and survival meant defeating rivals. In modern systems, that instinct backfires. Corporations destroy shared ecosystems for short-term gain. Political parties treat governance as sport, forgetting that if the system collapses, they fall too. Game theory reveals a disturbing truth. The line between zero-sum and non-zero-sum isn't fixed. Players can transform one into the other through their strategies. But doing so requires trust, and trust is fragile. Here's a thought experiment. You and a stranger each get $10. You can either keep it or donate it to a shared pot. For every $1 donated, both get $1 back. The rational choice is to keep your money. But if you both cooperate, you double your returns. In lab experiments, many people cooperate at first. But after a single betrayal, trust collapses. Players retreat to self-interest, and the shared gains vanish. The lesson is profound. Zero-sum games breed conflict. Non-zero-sum games demand vision and restraint. But in reality, most of life's games sit in between, a constant negotiation over whether we compete or cooperate. And as we'll see, even cooperation can fall apart if players can't coordinate their moves. Next, we explore normal form games, how payoff matrices turn human decisions into maps of strategy. Normal form games. A general plans a battle. She has two choices, attack by land or by sea. Her enemy, unaware of her choice, must decide whether to defend the coastline or fortify inland. Each decision leads to different consequences. The problem is clear. Neither knows what the other will do. Now imagine writing these options on a simple grid. One axis shows her choices. The other shows her enemies. At each intersection, you write down the payoff, victory, stalemate, or loss. This is a normal form game. A snapshot of strategy and consequence. It's how game theorists turn complex human dramas into clean mathematical maps. Normal form games don't care about time or sequence. They show all possible strategies and their outcomes as if every choice happens simultaneously. It's the perfect tool for analyzing one-shot decisions where players must act without knowing the other's move. The classic example is the prisoner's dilemma. Two suspects are arrested. The police have enough evidence to convict them of a minor crime but need a confession for the major charge. Each prisoner is offered a deal: betray the other and go free, or stay silent and risk a harsher sentence. If both stay silent, they each get 1 year. If one betrays and the other stays silent, the betrayer walks free while the silent one gets 5 years. If both betray, they each get 3 years. The payoff matrix looks simple, but its implications are anything but. Rational players, aiming to minimize risk, both betray, and yet mutual betrayal leads to a worse outcome than mutual silence. Cooperation would have been better, but the fear of being exploited drives them apart. This tension between individual rationality and collective good is a recurring theme in game theory. Normal form games aren't limited to criminals and generals. You see them everywhere. Two tech companies consider releasing a new product. If both launch, the market splits and profits shrink. If only one launches, they dominate. Each wants to act, but hesitation might save them both from disaster. Two roommates debate doing the dishes. If neither cleans, resentment builds. If both clean, the kitchen shines. If only one cleans, the other enjoys a free ride. Even daily choices, like whether to respond to a colleague's curt email, fit neatly into payoff grids. Respond angrily and risk escalation. Respond kindly and risk being seen as weak. Ignore it and let the tension simmer. Normal form games simplify reality, but they also highlight a limitation. They assume players act at the same time, with no chance to adjust based on the other's move. But what about situations where players act in sequence, watching and reacting as events unfold? To model those, game theorists use a different tool, one that unravels decisions like a branching tree. Extensive form games. You're playing chess. It's your turn. One move opens the board. Another locks it down. You hesitate, because every decision branches. If you move here, your opponent might respond there. Then you counter. Then they counter again. Suddenly, you're no longer thinking one move ahead. You're trying to see the entire forest of possibilities. This is the heart of an extensive form game. Unlike a simple payoff grid, here time and sequence matter. Each choice creates a branch, and every branch splits into more branches, forming a tree of decisions. Game theorists use these decision trees to model situations where players don't act simultaneously, but take turns, watching, reacting, and anticipating. Picture a company deciding whether to enter a new market. Their competitor waits to see if they act. If they do, the competitor must decide whether to fight for market share or step aside. Each choice depends on what came before and what they believe comes next. Draw it out, and you get a tree. At each node, players face a decision. At the tips of the branches, payoffs, weight, profits, losses, stalemates. Here's where the magic happens. By working backward from the end of the tree, players can identify the optimal path at every point. This technique is called backward induction. Start at the final outcomes. See which choices lead there, then step back, choosing the move that keeps you on the path to the best result. It's like planning a road trip. You don't just ask, where should I go first? You ask, where do I want to end up, and chart your route from there. In the Cold War, extensive form games helped military planners model nuclear standoffs. If one nation attacked, the other would retaliate. But if the first nation anticipated retaliation, would they still strike? This back-and-forth logic shaped doctrines of deterrence, where the goal wasn't to win, but to make the first move unthinkable. In relationships, decision trees play out silently. Should you apologize after a fight or wait for them to reach out? Each action branches, apologize, and they might forgive or take advantage. Wait, and they might cool down or grow distant. Choices echo down the tree. But there's a catch. Extensive form games assume players think several moves ahead. In reality, humans often don't. We get lost in the branches. We overestimate our foresight or underestimate our opponents in complex trees. Even computers struggle. So we create shortcuts, heuristics, and instincts that sometimes save us and sometimes lead us astray. Repeated games. You lend a friend $20. He promises to pay you back tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. He smiles, says he forgot his wallet, and promises again. A week passes. You start wondering, should you ever lend him money again? This isn't just a social dilemma. It's a repeated game. One where choices don't happen once and end. They echo across time, shaping every future round. Repeated games take the decision trees of extensive form and loop them endlessly. Players face the same choices over and over, but each choice now carries a second layer. It's not just about the payoff today, it's about building a reputation for tomorrow. Take the prisoner's dilemma. In a single round, the rational choice is betrayal, but repeat the game 100 times, and everything changes. Players who betray too soon find others betray them back. Players who cooperate too long risk exploitation. The game becomes a dance of trust and retaliation. In the 1980s, political scientist Robert Axelrod ran tournaments where computer programs played repeated prisoners' dilemmas. The surprising winner wasn't the most aggressive or the most forgiving. It was a simple strategy called tit-for-tat. Cooperate first. Then do whatever the other player did last time. If they betrayed, retaliate once. If they cooperated, reward them with cooperation. This strategy wasn't flashy, it wasn't ruthless, but it worked. Tit-for-tat created islands of trust in seas of deception, proving that cooperation can evolve even in hostile environments if players know they'll meet again. In real life, repeated games shape everything from trade agreements to marriages. Nations negotiate tariffs. Companies engage in price wars. Couples navigate the daily push and pull of compromise. Betray too often and others stop playing. Cooperate too blindly, and others take advantage. Every interaction writes the next chapter. Even in nature, repeated games emerge. Vampire bats share blood meals, feeding hungry roostmates in the hope the favor will be returned. But freeloaders, bats who take but never give, are quietly excluded from future help. Evolution punishes betrayal and rewards reciprocity. But here's the dark side. Repeated games can also trap players in cycles of revenge. A single betrayal spirals into endless retaliation. Wars drag on for generations because each side clings to the memory of past harm, unable to forgive, and not all repeated games are fair. In systems with power imbalances, one player can force others into patterns of submission, knowing they have no choice but to keep playing. The lesson is clear. In a repeated game, the smartest strategy isn't always the one that maximizes immediate gain. It's the one that builds a reputation strong enough to influence future play. But what happens when players don't even know the full game they're in? When information itself becomes a weapon? Bayesian Games. You're at an auction for a rare painting. The room hums with tension. You've studied the piece, estimated its worth, but there's a nagging doubt. What if everyone else knows something you don't? You bid cautiously. Another hand shoots up. Is he confident because the painting is worth more, or because he's bluffing? This is the essence of a Bayesian game. Unlike games where all players know the rules and payoffs, here information is hidden. You act not on certainty, but on belief, constantly guessing what others know, what they want, and how far they'll go to get it. In many real-world situations, players hold private information. Buyers know their budget, sellers know their costs. A company considering a merger knows its internal weaknesses, but hides them from competitors. Nations negotiating treaties know their own capabilities, but can only guess at their rivals. This uncertainty transforms strategy into a psychological labyrinth. Game theorists model this with types. Each player has a type, information known only to them. For example, a bidder might be an art expert or a speculator. You don't know which. So you estimate probabilities and adjust your strategy. Should you bid high, risking overpayment if the painting's value is less than you think? Or bid low and risk losing to someone who's better informed? This isn't just theory. It plays out every day. In salary negotiations, employers have budgets but conceal them. Candidates have minimum acceptable offers but keep them hidden. Each side guesses, probes, bluffs. In dating, you never see the full picture. Is your date genuinely interested, or just being polite? Should you reveal vulnerability now, or wait to see their intentions? Every move is a calculation based on incomplete data. In war, uncertainty can be fatal. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, both the US and the Soviet Union acted under incomplete knowledge of the other's intentions and capabilities. Misinterpretation could have triggered disaster. Strategies in Bayesian games often rely on signaling and screening. A company might invest heavily in visible research to signal strength, even if their internal finances are shaky. Investors screen startups by asking probing questions designed to reveal hidden weaknesses. But these tools are imperfect. Signals can be faked. Screens can be evaded. And in the shadows, bad actors thrive. Hidden information turns simple games into layers of nested uncertainty. Each player asks, not just, what do I want, but what do they know? What do they think I know? It's a hall of mirrors where perception and deception blur into one. Dominant strategies. The first time you play rock, paper, scissors, you hesitate. Should you lead with rock? Maybe scissors. People rarely expect scissors. But after a few rounds, you notice your friend always opens with rock. Suddenly, your choice isn't a guess anymore. Paper dominates. Whatever they do, paper beats their habit. A dominant strategy is like that. A move so obviously superior, it doesn't matter what anyone else does. It works every time. But life rarely makes it so easy. In The Prisoner's Dilemma, two suspects sit in separate rooms, facing police pressure. The decision is simple: betray your partner or stay silent. Each knows betrayal leads to a lighter sentence, regardless of what the other chooses. Silence risks being left behind. So both betray, not out of malice, but logic. Individually, it's their best move. Together, it's disaster. This isn't just a thought experiment. In business, companies often face the same trap. A retailer considers lowering prices to undercut rivals. Alone, it's a winning strategy: more customers, more market share. But if competitors match, profits shrink for everyone. Suddenly, the obvious move triggers a race to the bottom. Nature carries its own lessons. A rabbit hears a rustle in the grass. Fleeing immediately seems dominant. The cost of being wrong, a few wasted calories, is nothing compared to being eaten. But when predators exploit this, creating false alarms to exhaust prey, automatic fleeing becomes dangerous. Survival demands nuance. Even in relationships, dominant strategies can betray us. A partner who always concedes during arguments may avoid conflict in the short term, but over time, that pattern erodes respect, breeding imbalance. A strategy that felt safe becomes a slow trap. Dominance isn't about perfection. It assumes a static game where others don't adapt. But the moment players evolve, what once ruled collapses. In tennis, a dominant serve wins until opponents learn to read your movements. In cybersecurity, a dominant password strategy fails the second hackers adapt. The real world doesn't freeze in place for logic. It flows, shifts, and punishes rigidity. So what happens when no dominant move exists? When every strategy depends entirely on anticipating others? This is where game theory turns to its most famous concept, Nash Equilibrium. A balance not of power, but of mutual restraint, where players stop searching for dominance and settle for survival. Nash Equilibrium. Two drivers hurtle toward each other on a narrow road. There's only room for one to pass. Each knows the other must decide, swerve, or stay the course. If both swerve, they lose a little time. If one swerves and the other holds, the one who held feels triumphant. But if neither swerves, the result is catastrophic. This is the classic game of chicken, and it's where the Nash equilibrium comes alive. In 1950, a young mathematician named John Nash proposed a simple but profound idea. In many games, there exists a set of strategies where no player has anything to gain by changing their own choice, so long as the others keep theirs. It's not about everyone winning. It's about balance. No one regrets their decision, because any deviation would leave them worse off. In The Prisoner's Dilemma, the Nash equilibrium is mutual betrayal. Neither prisoner can improve their outcome by staying silent alone. It's a grim outcome but stable. In pricing wars, rival companies might settle into high prices, not because they trust each other, but because undercutting would trigger retaliation, leaving both worse off. In relationships, it's the uneasy truce after an argument. Neither partner apologizes, but neither escalates. Both hold their ground, even if it leaves them unhappy. Nash equilibrium isn't about perfection. It doesn't guarantee the best collective outcome. It only describes a point where change doesn't pay. That's why it can trap players in suboptimal situations, like businesses agreeing not to innovate or political parties locked in endless gridlock. Sometimes there are multiple equilibria. In a driving culture, everyone agrees to drive on the right or on the left. Either choice is fine, as long as everyone aligns. But what happens when coordination fails? Chaos at every intersection, and not all equilibria are fair. In markets, dominant players can enforce conditions that favor them while freezing out competitors. The equilibrium holds because challengers see no profitable path to disrupt it. In evolution, species settle into ecological niches, each constrained by the other's strategies. Change too much, and survival becomes impossible. The power of Nash equilibrium lies in its simplicity. It helps us predict where strategic interactions settle, but real life is rarely static. Players don't make decisions once and for all. They adapt, respond, and evolve over time. And when games stretch out across generations, when strategies evolve through trial and error, we enter a new dimension of game theory, where stability isn't just about choices but about survival. Nature's stable strategies. On the African savanna, two rival antelope lock horns. Neither wants to fight to the death, but neither wants to lose status. Most battles end quickly, with one backing down. But occasionally, neither yields and both suffer grave injuries. This isn't random. It's a strategy embedded in their DNA. In the 1970s, evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith saw how game theory could explain these patterns. He realized animals don't consciously plan. They carry strategies shaped by millions of years of survival. These strategies spread if they work, vanish if they fail. An evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS, is one that, once adopted by most of a population, resists invasion by alternatives. Consider hawks and doves. Hawks always fight. Doves display aggression but retreat if challenged. If every animal were a dove, hawks could invade and thrive, dominating the timid population. But if hawks become too common, the cost of constant fighting, injuries, death, makes dove-like restraint advantageous again. Over time, a balance emerges where both strategies coexist. These dynamics appear everywhere. In fish populations, some males are large and aggressive, fighting for territory. Others are small and sneaky, slipping past to fertilize eggs unnoticed. Neither strategy dominates completely. Each persists because it exploits the weaknesses of the other. In human societies, we see similar balances: aggression and diplomacy, competition and cooperation. Even cheating and honesty coexist, not because one is better, but because the presence of both creates a self-stabilizing system. This framework reveals a disturbing truth about conflict. Total peace or total war are rarely stable. Too much peace invites exploitation. Too much war exhausts populations. Stability arises in messy compromises where neither extreme can take over completely. But stability doesn't mean fairness. In some ecosystems, dominant species suppress others for generations until a shock disease, climate change, reshuffles the game board. In economies, monopolies enforce their strategies until a disruptive innovation resets the system. Even in relationships, patterns of dominance and submission can persist, not because they're ideal, but because no alternative has yet broken through. Game theory's lens on evolution shows us that strategies aren't static. They adapt, mutate, and spread based on results. Winning isn't about crushing opponents, it's about surviving long enough to reproduce your strategy. But in some games, survival itself isn't enough. Players must also ensure their payoffs are distributed fairly, or the system collapses from within. This leads us into Pareto efficiency and the unsettling question: what does it mean for a system to be better if some players still lose? Pareto efficiency. A village well supplies water to 5 families. If one family hoards buckets of water, others go thirsty. If everyone takes only what they need, all survive. But even then, disputes arise. Couldn't the strongest family get a little more? Should the weakest family get extra because of their children? Here's the paradox: any change to help one risks hurting another. This is Pareto efficiency. The idea that a system is efficient if no player can be made better off without making someone else worse off. It sounds simple, even fair, but reality is more complicated. Imagine 2 neighbors splitting a field. One grows wheat, the other raises sheep. They agree to divide the land equally, but later the sheep farmer realizes his flock would thrive with slightly more pasture. The wheat farmer would lose crops if he gives up land. Any reallocation benefits one at the other's expense. The current division is Pareto efficient, not because it's perfect, but because any shift hurts someone. In urban planning, Pareto efficiency explains why cities often lock into suboptimal designs. A crowded intersection could be redesigned to ease traffic flow, but the shop on the corner would lose foot traffic, and the rerouted buses might inconvenience hundreds. Improving the flow for drivers makes pedestrians or businesses worse off. Even nature shows us Pareto traps. Coral reefs support thousands of species in delicate balance. A sudden surge of one species, say algae, can smother corals, devastating fish populations. Attempts to fix the problem by removing algae harm herbivores reliant on it. Adjusting one player's payoff reverberates unpredictably across the ecosystem. In economics, Pareto efficiency is often misunderstood as fairness. It's not. A billionaire holding 90% of resources while the rest struggle can still be Pareto efficient, because redistributing wealth would harm the billionaire's position, even if it lifts others from poverty. This is why economists caution that Pareto efficiency isn't the same as justice or equality. It's a description of balance, not a value judgment. So why does this matter in game theory? Because in strategic systems, players often reach states where moving to a better collective outcome requires making at least one player worse off in the short term, and without external intervention or trust, no one wants to be the sacrificial lamb. But there are games where players don't just avoid harming each other, they actively seek to punish, bluff, and threaten to achieve their goals. In those games, equilibrium depends not on efficiency, but on credibility. That takes us to the world of subgame perfect equilibrium, where every step must be believable, or the entire strategy collapses. Subgame perfect equilibrium. A parent threatens their child. If you don't clean your room, no TV tonight. But later, the child misbehaves. It's dinner time. The parent wavers. Denying TV means tantrums. Giving in means the child learns the threat was empty. The parent faces a classic failure of credibility. The initial threat only works if it's believable at every step. This is the heart of subgame perfect equilibrium. In sequential games, it's not enough to plan the end game. Every move along the path must make sense, or players will call your bluff. Consider a high-stakes hostage negotiation. A government vows never to negotiate with terrorists. But when lives hang in the balance, will they really refuse? If kidnappers believe the government might yield under pressure, they're more likely to take hostages. This isn't hypothetical. In the 1970s, Italy faced waves of kidnappings. When wealthy families paid ransoms, kidnappers were emboldened. To break the cycle, the Italian government froze victims' assets, making it impossible for families to pay. This time, the threat was credible. Kidnappings plummeted. Subgame perfect equilibrium demands consistency. In extensive-form games, players analyze every subgame, every possible situation to ensure no player has an incentive to deviate at any point. If a threat isn't credible, it won't influence opponents' choices. If a promise can't be kept, players won't rely on it. In business, this plays out in pricing wars. A dominant company warns new entrants. If you undercut us, we'll flood the market and crush your profits. But if doing so would cost the incumbent millions, the threat rings hollow. Startups call the bluff and seize market share. Contrast that with Microsoft in the 1990s. When Netscape gained traction, Microsoft bundled Internet Explorer with Windows at no extra cost, an aggressive move that destroyed Netscape's profits. Future competitors saw this and hesitated. Microsoft's reputation for following through made their threats credible. In personal relationships, similar dynamics emerge. A partner threatens to leave if mistreated, but stays through repeated offenses. Over time, the threat loses weight. The other partner adjusts behavior, not to improve, but because they know they can. Subgame perfect equilibrium also explains why some treaties fail. During the Cold War, arms control agreements faltered when enforcement mechanisms were weak. Without credible punishment for violations, both sides had incentives to cheat. Later treaties included automatic sanctions and inspections, subgames where betrayal carried clear costs. The power of this concept lies in its demand for strategic honesty. Bluffing may work once, but in sequential games, only strategies that withstand scrutiny at every branch of the decision tree survive. And yet, life isn't always about perfectly planned strategies. Sometimes players face uncertainty so vast, they abandon logic and embrace probability. This opens the door to mixed strategies, where randomness itself becomes the smartest move. The strategic universe. You've already walked through a few of these games. Prisoner's dilemmas, zero-sum battles, repeated rivalries. But what you've seen so far is only a fraction of the strategic universe. To understand the whole picture, we need to step back and map every kind of game that humans, animals, and even machines can play. Step into a vast hall. Its walls are lined with glowing diagrams, its floors a maze of branching paths. At the center, a simple question floats in the air. What kind of game are you playing? Every choice you've ever made, every negotiation, every rivalry, every alliance fits somewhere in this hall. To navigate it, you must first understand its rooms. The first room feels familiar: cooperative and non-cooperative games. In some worlds, players can form binding agreements. Think of countries signing climate accords, or neighbors pooling resources to build a shared fence. Cooperation creates outcomes no one could achieve alone. But most of life happens in non-cooperative games. Rivals act independently, forming and breaking promises as they see fit. Businesses compete. Political parties maneuver. Even friendships sometimes collapse into silent competition. Here, trust isn't built into the system, it has to be earned. Deeper in the hall, two mirrored corridors reveal symmetric and asymmetric games. In symmetric games, players face identical strategies and payoffs. Rock, paper, scissors is symmetric. Your options match your opponent's. But in asymmetric games, the roles differ. A predator stalks prey. A government negotiates with citizens. A company sets prices while customers choose to buy or wait. Asymmetry shapes power, options, and risks. Turning a corner, you find a balance scale. On one side, zero-sum games. On the other, non-zero-sum games. In zero-sum, one player's gain is another's loss. Poker, war, sports championships. There can only be winners and losers. Non-zero-sum games are different. In trade agreements, both countries can prosper, or both can suffer if talks fail. Relationships thrive when both partners grow, but decay when resentment poisons them. Here, cooperation creates value, competition destroys it. A spiral staircase leads to a chamber of clocks, simultaneous and sequential games. In simultaneous games, players act without seeing each other's moves, like sealed bid auctions or setting prices in competitive markets. You must anticipate, not react. Sequential games unfold like chess, where one player moves, then the other responds. Timing becomes critical. Should you strike first, or wait and see? In diplomacy, these are the tense moments where a single move changes history. As you descend further, the air grows murkier. Perfect and imperfect information games are here. Perfect information means every move is visible, like chess. But most real-life games are imperfect. Poker players hide cards. Companies guard trade secrets. In relationships, unspoken intentions cloud understanding. You act in the dark, piecing together what little you know. In the next chamber, shadows twist into probability trees. Bayesian games dominate this space. Players hold private information about their type or intentions. You don't know if your rival is weak or bluffing strong. Negotiations, espionage, and even online dating live here. Each move relies on beliefs, not facts. The hall suddenly splits. One path leads to combinatorial games. Complex, perfect information games like chess, Go, and checkers. These are puzzles of pure logic, where mastery depends on foresight and computation. The other leads to discrete and continuous games. In discrete games, choices are countable: bet, fold, or raise. In continuous games, players can make infinite adjustments, like setting prices at any level or choosing exactly when to act. Further down, the room expands into open fields. Here lie differential games, where strategies unfold over time. Think missile defense systems tracking moving targets or autonomous cars adjusting paths. These games aren't played in steps. They flow. Beyond lies a jungle, teeming with life. This is the realm of evolutionary game theory. Strategies don't just win or lose, they evolve. Altruism, cheating, cooperation, all battle across generations, shaping which behaviors survive in populations. The fittest strategy isn't always the most aggressive. Often, it's the one that balances retaliation and forgiveness. At the far edge of the hall, the air shimmers unpredictably. This is where stochastic games live. Games where randomness dictates outcomes. Weather impacts farming strategies. Random demand affects supply chains. Here, players adapt not just to each other, but to chance itself. Finally, you step into a high balcony overlooking the entire hall. On the walls are strange diagrams of games within games, metagames. These aren't about moves or payoffs. They're about altering the very rules. A company changes the market by inventing a new product. A political movement shifts the game by rewriting laws. Players don't just play. They shape the game board itself. And further still, mean field games, where countless tiny players, citizens, bacteria, algorithms interact en masse, creating vast emergent patterns that no single player controls. Standing here, you see it all. The strategic universe isn't simple. It's a web of interconnected systems, static and dynamic, cooperative and competitive, certain and uncertain. Once you've seen the shapes of games, you can't unsee them. Every choice around you, every negotiation, every rivalry, every alliance is just another path through this hall. And now, you're ready to play better. The prisoner's dilemma. Every theory looks clean on paper until it's tested in the chaos of reality. The models you've seen so far, prisoner's dilemmas, Nash Equilibria, dominant strategies, were born in quiet rooms, built on chalkboards and equations. But outside those rooms, the games are louder, messier, and bloodier. This is where game theory collides with human ambition and fear. In business, rivals lock horns in pricing wars and hostile takeovers, each trying to outmaneuver the other without collapsing the market. In politics, leaders play high-stakes games of brinkmanship, daring their enemies to flinch first. One false move sparks economic crises or even war. Even in biology, strategies emerge not from conscious planning, but from millions of years of evolution, cooperation, deception, and retaliation encoded in DNA. These aren't just games played by governments or corporations. They're woven into everyday life, negotiating salaries, dividing household chores, choosing whether to confront a friend or let resentment quietly fester. You're already a player, whether you realize it or not. In this section, we step into these arenas, from corporate boardrooms to Cold War standoffs, from animal ecosystems to crowded marketplaces. We'll see how strategic principles shape the world and how the world reshapes them in return. Here, the stakes aren't theoretical. They're profit, power, survival, and every move carries consequences that ripple far beyond the players. Chicken and brinkmanship. You've crossed paths with this game before. Two suspects, two choices, betray or cooperate. Simple enough, or so it seemed. But that was just the surface. This time, imagine you're not in a police station. You're running a business, or leading a nation, or trying to save a fragile relationship. Suddenly, the stakes aren't years in prison. They're markets collapsing, cities burning, or love turning cold. Here, the prisoner's dilemma isn't theoretical. It's the invisible machinery running beneath the real world. And once you see its gears turning, you'll never unsee them. At its core, the game is a trap. Mutual cooperation brings the best collective outcome, but individual logic rewards betrayal. In a one-off encounter, trust is suicide. But the real world rarely offers just one round. In the 1980s, political scientist Robert Axelrod asked a simple question: what happens if the game is repeated endlessly? He invited programmers from around the world to submit strategies for an iterated prisoner's dilemma tournament. Their algorithms would face off, round after round, learning from one another. The winner wasn't the most aggressive, nor the most forgiving. It was a program called Tit-for-Tat, astonishingly simple. Start by cooperating. Then, do whatever your opponent did last time. Cooperate first. Retaliate if betrayed. Forgive instantly if cooperation resumes. This little strategy dominated far more complex ones because it balanced three critical traits: Untitled clarity. Opponents always knew what to expect. Untitled retaliation. Betrayals were punished immediately. Forgiveness. Players weren't locked in endless cycles of revenge. In real life, this pattern emerges everywhere. Nations trading resources. Tit-for-Tat explains why trade partners often punish tariffs with tariffs, but return to cooperation quickly once fairness resumes. In animal behavior, vampire bats share blood meals with starving roostmates, but only if those bats shared with them before. Freeloaders, those who take but never give, are quietly excluded. Even in human relationships, tit-for-tat plays out subconsciously. Kindness met with kindness. Betrayal answered in kind. And if forgiveness never arrives, the relationship spirals into permanent mistrust. But iterated dilemmas also reveal a darker side. One betrayal can poison trust for years. Two players locked in tit-for-tat can spiral into mutual destruction, unable to break free without an act of grace. In international relations, this explains feuds that last generations, each side mirroring past injuries with new ones. And in ecosystems, tit-for-tat explains cooperation among species, but also the sudden collapse when one species overexploits others. So the question isn't just, do you cooperate or betray? It's, how much do you value tomorrow? Because in a world of repeated encounters, the future is always watching. But what about games where there is no tomorrow? Where players don't plan for the long term but push each other to the brink, because survival means making the other blink first. The Stag Hunt. Picture two cars speeding toward each other on a narrow road. Neither driver slows down. The first to swerve is the chicken, humiliated, their courage questioned. But if neither swerves, both crash in a fiery wreck. This isn't just a teenage dare. It's a deadly metaphor for one of the most dangerous games in human history. At its heart, Chicken is about bluffing, intimidation, and pushing opponents to the edge of disaster. It rewards courage, but punishes stubbornness with ruin. The Cold War was a 40-year game of chicken played with nuclear weapons. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was its most famous round. As Soviet ships carrying missiles approached Cuba, U.S. President John F. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev faced two bad options: swerve and remove the missiles, appearing weak, or hold course and risk nuclear war. Kennedy, too, was cornered. Backing down would embolden Soviet expansion. Standing firm might trigger annihilation. Both sides escalated threats. U.S. forces went to DEFCON 2, one step from nuclear launch readiness. Soviet commanders in Cuba prepared to fire tactical nukes if invaded. For 13 days, the world held its breath. In the end, Khrushchev flinched, agreeing to remove the missiles in exchange for a secret U.S. concession to withdraw missiles from Turkey. But it was a narrow escape. At least one Soviet submarine captain had already ordered a nuclear torpedo prepared, stopped only by the refusal of a single officer to authorize launch. The psychology of chicken rewards credibility. A player willing to go all the way, reckless or not, forces the other to yield. Some strategists even advocate removing your brakes, literally or metaphorically. In Chicken, showing you can't change course because of political constraints, cultural pride, or sheer unpredictability can intimidate rivals. But this tactic is a double-edged sword. In 1956, Egyptian President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain, France, and Israel invaded, expecting Nasser to back down. Instead, he held firm, rallying Arab nations and forcing a humiliating withdrawal for the Western powers. Even business leaders play chicken. When two companies consider launching competing products, each hopes the other will retreat to avoid splitting the market. But if neither backs down, they might both overextend, burning cash in a destructive price war. Uber and Lyft spent years locked in such a struggle, pouring billions into subsidies, promotions, and driver bonuses. The result? Market domination came at the cost of staggering losses on both sides. But here's the danger. Chicken encourages irrational escalation. The fear of humiliation can outweigh logic, pushing players past the point of no return. Wars start not because they're inevitable, but because leaders refuse to blink. And unlike the prisoner's dilemma, where mutual betrayal at least leaves players alive, Chicken's worst-case outcome is annihilation. The key isn't avoiding conflict. It's crafting strategies that make your threats credible but controllable. Because the moment you lose control of the game, you're not playing chicken anymore. You're hurtling toward collision. Yet not every game pits players against each other. Some demand trust, patience, and mutual coordination, not to avoid disaster, but to seize shared opportunity. That's the Stag Hunt. And its lesson is even more subtle. Deterrence Theory. Imagine you're in the forest with a small group of hunters. You spot a stag grazing at the edge of a clearing. If everyone works together, you can surround it and bring it down, a feast for all. But catching a stag requires trust. If even one hunter panics or defects, the stag escapes. A hare darts out nearby. Smaller, easier to catch. If you chase it, you'll at least eat tonight. But if everyone starts chasing hares, the stag will never be caught. This is the Stag Hunt, a game about cooperation, risk, and trust. At first glance, it seems simple. Everyone benefits from pursuing the stag. So why wouldn't they? Because trust is fragile. Because fear of others' defection breeds defection. Because the risk of ending up with nothing often outweighs the promise of plenty. In modern terms, this isn't about hunting, it's about collective action. During the early days of the European Union, member states faced a stag hunt. Coordinated economic policies promised prosperity, like the stag, but only if everyone committed. The temptation was to prioritize national interests, like chasing hares, undermining the shared vision. Only sustained trust turned the EU from an idea into reality. In tech, companies developing shared standards often face the same dilemma. Should they invest time and money into a universal platform that benefits all? Or focus on their own proprietary systems to grab quick profits? The payoff for cooperation is massive, but only if rivals don't defect. Bluetooth is a success story. Early tech companies trusted enough to agree on a standard, creating a market larger than any one player could dominate. Contrast this with the fragmented world of charging cables and competing video formats, where distrust splintered progress for years. Even biology has its stag hunts. In pack hunters like wolves, bringing down large prey requires perfect coordination. A single wolf breaking formation can cost the pack its meal. So evolution favored behaviors that reinforce trust, subtle signals, social hierarchies, even punishment of defectors. In human relationships, the pattern repeats. Two people might build a shared future, children, homes, dreams. But each must risk vulnerability. The fear of being abandoned makes some settle for fleeting rewards, never chasing the stag of deep connection. But there's a paradox here. The stag hunt isn't like the prisoner's dilemma. Defection isn't driven by selfishness. It's driven by doubt. If you truly believed everyone else would cooperate, you would too. Coordination failures aren't betrayals. They're tragedies of mistrust. This insight makes the stag hunt deeply relevant to climate change, transitioning to renewable energy, reducing emissions, preserving ecosystems. These are global stags. The rewards are immense, but the costs of early commitment are high. And so nations hedge, fearing others will take the easy way out. What breaks the cycle? In game theory, focal points, also called shelling points, help players align without direct communication. A leader may step up, committing visibly and inspiring trust. Social norms, treaties, and reputational incentives all create focal points. When trust takes hold, the collective power of a group exceeds anything individuals could achieve alone. When it fails, the world gets a handful of hares instead of a stag. And yet some leaders don't aim for trust at all. They rely instead on threats and deterrence, playing games where survival depends not on cooperation but on projecting power. That's where we go next. Mutually assured destruction. In 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev stared at a map of Cuba. U.S. reconnaissance planes had discovered missile installations. The American president, John F. Kennedy, had imposed a naval blockade. Both sides knew a single misstep could ignite nuclear war, but neither side wanted that, and yet they had to make it look like they might. This was deterrence at its most terrifying. At its core, deterrence isn't about using power. It's about the credible threat of using it. The idea is simple. Convince your opponent that attacking you will trigger such devastating retaliation that the only rational choice is inaction. It's the logic of the rattlesnake. It doesn't want to bite. Venom is costly to produce, but the rattle warns predators, come closer, and I will strike. During the Cold War, this logic scaled up to unimaginable proportions. And USSR amassed thousands of nuclear warheads, not because they planned to use them, but to ensure that if one side launched first, the other could still destroy them in retaliation. This strategy became known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The name wasn't poetic, it was a description. But deterrence only works if your threats are credible. If a predator senses the rattlesnake's bluff, it strikes anyway. In human terms, if a nation threatens retaliation but lacks the means or will to follow through, deterrence collapses. This dynamic played out in 1950 during the Korean War. When Chinese troops entered the conflict, the U.S. considered nuclear strikes, but hesitated. That hesitation was noted by adversaries worldwide, undermining America's perceived resolve to strengthen deterrence. Later U.S. leaders made their warnings ambiguous. Would they use nukes in a conventional conflict? They refused to say. This strategic ambiguity made it harder for rivals to gamble. Deterrence also appears outside geopolitics. In business, large firms sometimes use predatory pricing, temporarily lowering prices so aggressively that smaller competitors can't survive. The message is clear: challenge us, and you'll lose. Even if the company suffers losses in the short term, the long-term effect is deterrence. In neighborhoods, homeowners post security signs, even without alarm systems. The bluff works because intruders don't want to risk finding out. But deterrence has limits. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, both Kennedy and Khrushchev understood the danger of escalation. Yet both had to project unwavering strength to maintain credibility. Miscalculations like a U.S. plane accidentally straying into Soviet airspace brought them inches from catastrophe. This is deterrence's paradox. For threats to work, you must appear willing to act on them, even if acting would harm you as much as your opponent. The tighter the bluff, the greater the danger. Unlike the Stag Hunt's delicate trust, deterrence thrives on fear. But fear is volatile. It corrodes relationships, hardens enemies, and leaves no room for cooperation. When two players build strategies entirely around preventing action, what happens when one finally calls the other's bluff? This is where deterrence collapses into the next game: mutually assured destruction. Oligopoly and price wars. At the height of the Cold War, there were more than 60,000 nuclear weapons on Earth, enough to obliterate every city, every farm, every living thing, many times over. And yet, none were fired. Why? Because both superpowers understood a chilling truth: the first strike might destroy their enemy, but not before the enemy had time to respond, and that response would be apocalyptic. This was mutually assured destruction, MAD. A strategy so paradoxical, it kept the peace not by preventing war, but by making war unthinkable. But MAD didn't come from noble restraint. It was engineered fear. If the United States launched a surprise attack, Soviet submarines and mobile missile units would retaliate even as their cities burned. If the USSR struck first, American bombers and silos would unleash hell in return. Each side built second strike capabilities precisely, so no victory was possible. The goal wasn't to fight and win. It was to ensure that no one dared start. The logic extended far beyond bombs. Missile defense systems were discouraged, not because they didn't work, but because they undermined MAD's balance. If one side believed it could intercept a retaliatory strike, it might be tempted to attack first. Stability depended on vulnerability. This meant the world's safety relied on both superpowers being equally terrifyingly exposed. But MAD created a new kind of tension. The very systems designed to prevent war also amplified the risk of accidental war. In 1983, Soviet early warning systems mistakenly reported incoming U.S. missiles. For 5 long minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov had to decide whether to launch a counterstrike. He chose to wait. His calm skepticism may have saved the world. In 1995, Russian radars mistook a Norwegian scientific rocket for a U.S. nuclear missile. President Boris Yeltsin had his nuclear briefcase, the Chajut, opened for the first time. Only after frantic verification did they stand down. These incidents reveal MAD's dark side, a system that worked perfectly until the day it didn't. In business and politics, similar dynamics appear. Two corporations wage all-out price wars to drive each other out of a market. Both hemorrhage cash. Neither gains or rival gangs escalate retaliation until entire communities are paralyzed by violence. Each thinks striking first will end the cycle. It rarely does. MAD teaches us a haunting lesson. Some games can only be won by never playing. But the question lingers, how do players escape this kind of trap? Some look for silent agreements, unwritten understandings, and careful dance-like maneuvers where competitors coexist rather than destroy each other. This leads us into the world of oligopolies and price wars, where collusion whispers in the shadows, and even rivals find a way to share the stage. Auction theory. In the mid-1990s, two giants ruled the skies, Boeing and Airbus. For decades, their rivalry looked fierce, public feuds over subsidies, aggressive marketing, and claims of technological supremacy. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible dance was unfolding. Neither company pushed too hard. Prices stayed high. Markets divided neatly, and both flourished. This wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Oligopolies are markets where a few powerful players dominate. Think airlines, oil companies, tech giants. Each knows their actions ripple instantly to rivals. Lower prices to capture market share, and competitors retaliate. Raise prices too high, and someone will undercut you, so they move cautiously. Sometimes they even move together without saying a word. This silent cooperation isn't formal collusion. No signed contracts, no secret meetings. It's tacit. Game theory explains why. In a repeated game, players learn from each other's responses, slash prices, and rivals will punish you in kind. But hold steady, and everyone enjoys steady profits. The result is an unspoken agreement. Don't rock the boat. But when tacit understandings fail, price wars erupt. In the early 2000s, two airlines, Ryanair and EasyJet, waged all-out war over European routes. Ticket prices plummeted. Passengers cheered, but both companies bled cash. Only after years of losses did they settle into a truce, carving up markets to avoid further mutual destruction. Even tech giants aren't immune. Amazon and Walmart have danced this same dance. Aggressive price matching leads to razor-thin margins. Both know constant undercutting hurts long-term profitability. The result? Price wars flare briefly, then calm as each side retreats to its corner. But this delicate balance can be shattered by outsiders. In the smartphone market, Apple and Samsung enjoyed their duopoly for years. Then Chinese manufacturers like Huawei and Xiaomi entered with cheaper models. Suddenly, prices were no longer a dance, they were a knife fight. Oligopoly isn't just about competition, it's about restraint. A single player's greed can destabilize the system. But with enough trust or enough fear, rivals can coexist like predators sharing a hunting ground. And yet even these silent agreements sometimes require engineering. Rules of the game don't just happen, they're designed. That's where auction theory, bargaining games, and mechanism design come into play, tools for shaping markets, allocating resources, and making sure players play fair. The winner's curse. You're at an art auction. The room is silent, except for the auctioneer's chant. A man in the back raises his paddle, $1 million. Another counters, 1.1 million. The air tightens as bids climb higher. Finally, the gavel slams. Sold for $2 and $3 million. To the untrained eye, it's pure theater. But beneath the surface lies one of the most intricate games humans have ever played. This is auction theory. At its heart, an auction is a game of incomplete information. You know how much you value the item. You don't know how much your rivals value it, or how far they're willing to go. Every bid is both a signal and a trap. Bid too low, and you lose. Bid too high, and you win, but regret it instantly. Economists call this the winner's curse, the tendency for the winning bid to exceed the item's true value. It's why energy companies often overpay for oil drilling rights, and why first-time homebuyers sometimes bid thousands over market price. But not all auctions are the same. The English auction, what you see at Sotheby's, is an ascending bid. Each new offer raises the stakes until only one player remains. This rewards patience and nerve. The Dutch auction flips the script. Prices start high and drop until someone accepts. Tulip sellers in 17th century Holland pioneered this method. It's fast and brutal. Hesitate too long, and someone else grabs the prize. Then there's the sealed bid auction, where each player submits one secret bid. The highest offer wins, but no one knows how close the competition was. Governments often use this for contracts and resource leases. But secrecy amplifies the winner's curse. The Victory auction, a variation, asks players to submit sealed bids, yet the winner pays the second highest price. This strange rule encourages bidders to offer their true valuation, knowing they won't be punished for overbidding. But auction theory isn't confined to paintings and tulips. Online marketplaces like eBay run millions of auctions daily. Google and Facebook sell ad space through real-time auctions where prices shift in milliseconds. Even dating apps use auction-like mechanics. Your bid is the time and effort you invest, competing silently against others for attention. Job markets echo this too. Candidates signal their value. Employers weigh offers like bids. In hot industries, companies engage in bidding wars for top talent. And here's the twist. You've probably played in auctions without realizing it. Ever tried booking a flight during peak season? Airline pricing algorithms run hidden auctions behind the scenes, adjusting fares based on demand and competitor moves. Auction theory reveals an unsettling truth. These games aren't neutral. The rules shape outcomes. Change the format and you change who wins, how much they pay, and whether the system favors the bold or the cautious. That's why mechanism design, the art of crafting rules for fairness and efficiency, has become one of the most powerful tools in modern economics. But before we get there, we need to understand the psychology of bidding itself. Why does winning sometimes feel like losing? And why do rational players so often walk away cursed? Bargaining games. You've just won your dream house at auction. The thrill of victory surges through you. But as the champagne fades, a creeping doubt takes its place. Did you overpay? Were you bidding against people who knew something you didn't? This isn't buyer's remorse. It's the winner's curse. The curse haunts every competitive bid where players have incomplete information. You know how much the item is worth to you, but you don't know its true value, or how rivals assessed it. So when you win, it often means one thing. Everyone else valued it less. Did they underestimate it? Or did you overestimate? Consider oil drilling rights. In the 1970s, companies bid billions for Gulf of Mexico leases, only to find their wells dry. Each firm thought they had an edge, but collectively they overvalued the sites, or sports drafts. Teams fight for first picks, pouring millions into scouting. Yet history shows early picks often underperform expectations. The price of winning the draft lottery is betting big on potential that doesn't always deliver. Even in tech, acquisitions often end this way. Remember Facebook's $19 billion purchase of WhatsApp? At the time, analysts argued it was madness. Was it? Maybe not, but history is littered with billion-dollar wins that turned toxic. AOL Time Warner, Microsoft Nokia, MySpace's rapid fall after News Corp's purchase. But the winner's curse isn't limited to corporations and billionaires. Think of a wedding venue in a hot market. You bid high because you're desperate to lock it down. Later, you realize the winner was the only one willing to stretch that far, and you've strapped yourself to years of debt. Even eBay shoppers aren't immune. In the heat of bidding wars, people often overpay for items they could have bought cheaper with a little patience. Why does this happen? Because auctions amplify two psychological traps. One, overconfidence, believing you have better information than your rivals. One, over-escalation of commitment. Once you've bid, you feel invested. Backing out feels like loss, even if continuing is worse. This is why seasoned bidders develop countermeasures. They set maximum prices in advance, refuse to get emotional, and assume their valuation is optimistic, not conservative. But the curse's reach goes even further. In job markets, candidates sometimes accept offers too quickly, underestimating their value. Conversely, companies overbid for talent, only to realize later the cultural fit was wrong, or the skills less unique than believed. Governments aren't immune either. When countries compete for Olympic hosting rights, their bids skyrocket with promises of infrastructure and spectacle. Yet after the Games, many host cities are left with debt and abandoned stadiums. The lesson is brutal. Winning a competitive bid is only victory if the price matches reality. Otherwise, triumph becomes a slow bleed. And this raises a deeper question. If winning can feel like losing, what about negotiation itself? How do players navigate a world where every move feels like a mini-auction? This takes us to bargaining games, where the art of give and take becomes its own battlefield. Mechanism design. Two CEOs sit across a mahogany table. One represents a struggling startup desperate for funding. The other leads a giant corporation eyeing a cheap acquisition. Coffee cools untouched. The air is thick with silence, each man waiting for the other to speak first. Whoever does will reveal something. This isn't a casual chat, it's a bargaining game. At its heart, bargaining is a dance between cooperation and conflict. Each player wants an agreement, but also wants the biggest possible slice. The tension lies in information asymmetry. Who needs the deal more? Who has better alternatives? Who is bluffing? In game theory, this is modeled as a non-zero-sum game. Both sides can gain, but the division of gains depends on strategy. Consider a salary negotiation. You want $80,000. The company budget is $90,000, but you don't know that. You start at $75,000, thinking it's safe. They counter with $70,000, anchoring low. You settle at $72,000, feeling victorious, unaware you left money on the table. This is the power of anchoring. The first offer acts as a psychological magnet. Studies show that even absurd anchors pull final agreements closer to them. But bargaining games get darker when stakes rise. In 1972, Lufthansa Flight 649 was hijacked. The terrorists demanded $5 million for the hostages' lives. German negotiators countered with $2 million. Time stretched. Panic mounted. Finally, they settled at $4 million. The passengers were released. But the precedent emboldened future hijackings. Here, the reservation price wasn't just money. It was lives. Corporate mergers often become bargaining battlegrounds. One side leaks favorable numbers to the press to boost perceived value. The other threatens to walk away, testing whether the deal matters more to their rival. In 2011, AT&T offered $39 billion to acquire T-Mobile. Regulators intervened, and T-Mobile walked away, not weaker, but stronger. The failed deal left AT&T paying a $6 billion breakup fee, effectively funding T-Mobile's comeback. Even at home, bargaining games appear. Parents and children negotiate bedtime extensions. Couples navigate household chores. The stakes aren't billions, but emotional equity. Who concedes first? And how often game theory teaches a key insight. The best negotiators aren't always the toughest. They're strategic. They understand BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. The stronger your fallback, the more leverage you hold. A job candidate with multiple offers negotiates confidently. A country with allies bargains harder than one alone. A parent who doesn't fear tears can enforce boundaries, but bargaining carries risks. Push too hard, and the deal collapses. Cave too soon, and you signal weakness. The art lies in reading the game, knowing when to hold firm, when to give ground, and when to walk away. And in some games, it isn't about negotiating fairly at all. It's about engineering the rules so outcomes favor you before anyone sits down. That's the realm of mechanism design, a strategy so powerful it can reshape entire markets. By changing the rules of the game, you can change the outcome. Altruism and evolution. Imagine sitting down to play a game where the rules were written by your opponent. Every move you make, every strategy you try, plays out inside a system designed for them to win. Now realize, this isn't just a thought experiment. It's how much of the modern world works. Mechanism design is game theory flipped on its head. Instead of asking, what's the best strategy within a game, it asks, how do we design the game itself so players produce the outcomes we want? It's the invisible hand behind everything from auction houses to tax codes. The rules aren't neutral. They steer behavior. Take Google's ad auctions. Every second, millions of advertisers bid for your attention, but it's not a simple highest bidder wins system. Google engineered a mechanism that rewards relevance as well as money. If an ad isn't clicked often enough, it's pushed down, even if the bid is high. The result, users see better ads, and advertisers optimize for engagement. Without this design, the system would collapse into a spam-ridden mess. Or consider voting systems. In first-past-the-post elections, voters often face a heartbreaking choice: support their favorite candidate or vote strategically to block a worse one. Mechanism designers propose alternatives, ranked choice voting, approval voting, that change how preferences translate into power. Each design rewards different behaviors: consensus building, bold campaigning, or strategic alliances. Even dating apps are mechanism designers in disguise. Their algorithms decide which profiles you see and in what order. Small tweaks, like limiting daily swipes, change user behavior dramatically. By shaping the rules of engagement, they influence who matches, how conversations start, and even how long users stay single. But mechanism design isn't just about efficiency. It can be weaponized. In 19th century England, a tax on windows, intended as a wealth proxy, led homeowners to brick them up, darkening cities for decades. A poorly designed rule encouraged destructive behavior. Modern examples abound. Housing markets with rent controls, designed to protect tenants, sometimes discourage new construction, worsening shortages. Welfare systems with harsh cutoffs can trap recipients in poverty, afraid to earn just enough to lose support. The lesson is profound. Rules create incentives, and incentives shape outcomes. Design them poorly, and even rational players will behave in irrational, destructive ways. Design them well, and collective behavior aligns with desired goals without coercion. In the end, mechanism design isn't just a technical field, it's power. Whoever writes the rules wields silent influence over everyone who plays. And while most players focus on their next move, a few are busy rewriting the game board entirely. But nature has been doing this all along. Evolution has its own mechanisms, its own designs, and in the next chapter we'll see how biological and social systems converge in unexpected ways. Matching theory. A vampire bat returns from a successful hunt. Her belly is full of warm blood, but several of her roostmates weren't so lucky. One by one, they nuzzle her, begging for a share. She grooms them, hesitates, then regurgitates a little blood into each mouth. On the surface, it looks like charity, but nature rarely deals in pure kindness. For decades, biologists struggled with this paradox. Why would an animal sacrifice energy or resources to help others? Wouldn't selfish genes outcompete altruistic ones? Game theory offered an answer. Altruism isn't selfless, it's strategy. In an iterated prisoner's dilemma, cooperation can evolve if players remember past encounters. Vampire bats that share today are more likely to be fed when they go hungry tomorrow. This tit-for-tat dynamic punishes cheaters and rewards generosity. But it goes deeper. Kin selection explains why bees sacrifice their lives to defend a hive. They don't reproduce individually, but their actions ensure the queen, sharing 50% of their genes, survives to pass on copies of themselves. Helping relatives is, in a way, helping oneself. In humans, similar instincts surface. Parents risk their lives for children. Siblings share resources instinctively. Even cousins and grandparents show measurable favoritism. Gens act to maximize their own propagation, not individual survival, but altruism extends beyond family. In human societies, helping strangers often pays unexpected dividends. Early hunter-gatherers who shared food gained reputations as valuable allies. Those reputations became social capital, protection during conflict, assistance during illness, and access to mates. Cheaters, meanwhile, were ostracized or punished. Even modern life echoes these ancient dynamics. Think of a colleague who stays late to help with your project. Next time they're under pressure, you feel compelled to return the favor. Or a neighbor who lends tools freely, earning trust and goodwill that might one day save their own roof. In markets, companies donate to charity or embrace sustainability. Skeptics call it virtue signaling, but the result is often the same: a stronger brand, loyal customers, and favorable treatment from regulators. Altruism, it turns out, sells, but the system isn't foolproof. Cheaters, those who take without giving, can destabilize cooperation. That's why punishment systems evolve: gossip, shunning, fines. In many societies, reputational harm alone is enough to keep freeloaders in check. This is altruism's true genius. It doesn't rely on pure goodwill. It thrives in systems where helping others is the best way to help yourself. And yet, allocating resources fairly isn't easy. Who deserves help? Who gets priority? When choices involve pairing people and resources, doctors to hospitals, students to schools, even organ donors to recipients, we enter the world of matching theory. Here, the stakes aren't just survival, but fairness itself. Tit-for-tat and reciprocity. Imagine you're a medical student about to graduate. You've worked for years, sacrificed weekends, survived grueling exams. Now one decision looms. Where will you do your residency? Across the country, hospitals are also waiting, each with its own preferences for which graduates to recruit. The problem: there are more students than positions. Some hospitals are flooded with applicants. Others are ignored entirely. How do you assign students to hospitals fairly? This isn't just a logistical headache. It's a game. In the 1960s, economist Gale and mathematician Shapley designed a mechanism to solve it: the deferred acceptance algorithm. Their system didn't just match people randomly, it created stable pairings where no two players would rather ditch their assigned partners for each other. Today, this algorithm powers the U.S. National Resident Matching Program. Without it, the system would descend into chaos: hospitals poaching students, students holding multiple offers, everyone hedging bets until the last second. But matching theory doesn't end at hospitals. Think about organ transplants. When kidneys are donated, they can't just go to the highest bidder or the longest waiting patient. Compatibility matters. Lives depend on an efficient, fair system. Matching theory helps allocate organs so that as many lives as possible are saved, often by creating intricate chains of donations where one altruistic donor triggers a cascade of matches. Even dating apps are modern experiments in matching theory. Swipe right, swipe left. It feels casual. But behind the scenes, algorithms are trying to optimize pairings, balancing user preferences, engagement time, and even geography. Poorly designed systems lead to frustration and ghost towns of inactive users. Well-designed ones create vibrant ecosystems where people actually meet. Yet here, fairness gets murkier. Who defines an optimal match? Users or the platform profiting from their engagement? Markets use matching theory too. School choice programs in cities like Boston and New York apply it to assign students to public schools based on preferences, capacities, and priorities. Without these systems, wealthier families might dominate desirable schools while others scramble for leftovers. But no design is perfect. Critics argue that even stable matches can perpetuate inequalities if the inputs like school rankings or donor networks are biased. The genius of matching theory lies in this paradox. You can't make everyone perfectly happy, but you can design systems where no one has the incentive to break the rules. It's not about maximizing happiness, it's about minimizing envy. And envy is a powerful destabilizer. Left unchecked, it leads players to defect, hoard, and exploit. To maintain cooperation in a world of repeated interactions, players need strategies that reward fairness and punish betrayal. That brings us to the ultimate real-world strategy for iterated games, tit-for-tat and reciprocity. Social traps and commons dilemmas. Picture a small village where families rely on each other during hard winters. One family shares their food with a neighbor who's fallen on tough times. Months later, when the roles reverse, the help is quietly returned. This isn't charity, it's survival. Reciprocity, helping those who helped you, is one of the oldest strategies in human history. And in game theory, it has a name: tit-for-tat. We first saw it dominate in Robert Axelrod's computer tournaments. Strategies competed in an iterated prisoner's dilemma, cooperate or betray, round after round. Some programs played aggressively, always betraying. Others started soft but never punished betrayal. But it was tit-for-tat, a deceptively simple strategy that triumphed. Start by cooperating. Mirror your opponent's last move, reward cooperation, punish betrayal. If they return to cooperation, forgive instantly. This balance of generosity, retaliation, and forgiveness made tit-for-tat unbeatable in repeated games. You see it everywhere in life. In trade, nations punish tariffs with counter-tariffs. When cooperation resumes, so does free trade. The US and China's trade war played out like a global-scale tit-for-tat, with rounds of escalation giving way to periods of tentative peace. In relationships, people subconsciously employ it. Friendships thrive when kindness is reciprocated. Betrayals forgotten, birthdays, unreturned calls often lead to subtle withdrawal until the balance restores. Even on social media, reciprocity drives engagement. Like someone's post, and they're more likely to like yours. Ignore them, and they'll disappear from your notifications. But tit-for-tat has weaknesses. In environments full of noise, where mistakes or misunderstandings look like betrayal, it can spiral into endless retaliation. A late response, a forgotten message, a tariff misunderstood as aggression. Cycles of revenge ignite over accidents. That's why researchers found generous tit-for-tat, occasionally forgiving even unprovoked betrayals, outperforms strict mirroring in noisy worlds. Nature plays these games too. Cleaner fish nibble parasites off larger fish. Both benefit, until a cleaner takes a bite of flesh. The host punishes this betrayal by swimming off. But if cleaners return to honest behavior, the relationship often resumes. Vampire bats, as we saw earlier, share food selectively, feeding bats that fed them in the past. Cheaters are remembered and excluded from future meals. Tit-for-tat's genius is its simplicity. It teaches that cooperation isn't naive, retaliation isn't cruelty, and forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a strategy honed by evolution to keep players honest in a world where trust is fragile. But what happens when shared resources aren't governed by relationships or memory? What happens when players take from the same well, forest, or atmosphere, hoping others will conserve while they exploit? That's when games devolve into social traps and commons dilemmas, and the stakes shift from individual cooperation to collective survival. Signaling and screening. In 1833, a British economist named William Forster Lloyd described a simple but devastating scenario. Imagine a village where every farmer lets their cattle graze freely on a shared pasture. At first, the system works. But as each farmer adds more cows to maximize personal gain, the grass thins. Eventually, the pasture is ruined, and everyone suffers. This became known as the tragedy of the commons. But it's not just about cows and grass. It's about fisheries collapsing from overfishing, forests stripped bare by logging, and even your own local traffic jam, each driver trying to save a few minutes by using the shortcut until it's no longer short. In game theory, commons dilemmas are a special class of social traps. Each player acts rationally in the short term, but collectively, they create disaster. It's the same logic behind climate change. One factory's emissions seem negligible. One extra flight feels insignificant, but multiply by billions of players, and the planet itself becomes the commons, warming, flooding. So why don't players just cooperate? Because in large groups, trust erodes. Unlike tit-for-tat's small, repeated interactions, commons dilemmas involve many anonymous players. If others conserve, exploiting gives you an advantage. If others exploit, your sacrifice feels pointless. This psychological trap is called the free rider problem. Why should I pay for public goods if others will cover the cost? But there are ways out. In some communities, informal rules emerge. Lobster fishers in Maine, for example, developed a self-enforced code about trap placement and catch limits long before government intervention. Violators faced social punishment, damaged gear, exclusion from the group. In Switzerland, alpine farmers created rotational grazing schedules centuries ago. Everyone followed them, knowing defection threatened not just the pasture, but their reputation and survival. Modern solutions scale up these principles. Governments impose quotas, taxes, and regulations to align individual incentives with collective outcomes. Carbon taxes make pollution costly. Fishing limits preserve stocks. Public shaming, even in the form of environmental ratings, pressures companies to act sustainably. But these mechanisms aren't perfect. Powerful players can exploit loopholes. Enforcement fails without global cooperation. And some traps are so entrenched they feel impossible to escape. Social traps also appear in less obvious places. Social media platforms reward addictive behavior, scrolling, outrage, clickbait. Users want meaningful interactions but fall into cycles that exploit their attention. Each user's engagement benefits the platform while collectively degrading the experience. Even urban planning suffers. Drivers take shortcuts through neighborhoods, crowding streets not designed for heavy traffic. What feels rational individually creates chaos for everyone. The lesson is sobering. Rational players in poorly designed systems often destroy the very resources they depend on. Escaping these traps requires more than individual restraint. It demands systems that reward cooperation, punish defection, and sometimes redesign the game entirely, because when the commons collapses, no one wins. But in some games, players aren't trying to exploit, they're trying to stand out. From peacocks displaying giant tails to candidates embellishing resumes, signaling and screening determine who's chosen and who's ignored. Principal-agent problem. A male peacock spreads his feathers, a dazzling fan of iridescent blues and greens. To a predator, it's a liability, heavy, slow, impossible to hide. But to a female, it's a signal. Look how strong I must be, it says. If I can survive despite this handicap, this isn't vanity. It's strategy. In game theory, signaling happens when one player conveys hidden qualities through costly actions. And it's everywhere. You send signals every time you dress for an interview, buy an expensive watch, or stay late at work. The goal isn't the action itself, it's what it communicates: competence, wealth, dedication. But there's a flip side. Screening. When information flows the other way, the receiver designs tests to reveal the sender's qualities. employers use interviews, degrees, and reference checks to screen candidates. Banks use credit scores to screen borrowers. Even dating apps use prompts and photos as crude screening tools. This two-way dance, signaling and screening, arises because of information asymmetry. One player knows more than the other. A job applicant knows their own work ethic. The employer doesn't. A used car seller knows if the car's a lemon. The buyer doesn't. The result is a strategic game where players expend effort, money, and time not to change reality, but to shape perceptions. Consider higher education. A college degree isn't always about learning. It's a costly signal to employers. I have discipline, intelligence, and the ability to complete long-term projects. Screening systems like standardized tests, internships, and trial periods filter out those whose signals don't match reality. But the system isn't perfect. Degrees inflate, tests become coaching games, and some signals lose meaning as more people adopt them. Luxury goods tell a similar story. Why buy a $10,000 handbag? The materials aren't 100 times better than a $10 one. But the cost itself is the signal. Economist Thorstein Veblen called this conspicuous consumption, spending to demonstrate status, not utility. Car brands know this too. A Ferrari isn't just fast, it's loud, impractical, and expensive to maintain. These flaws reinforce the signal. I can afford to care only about image. Even biology runs on these dynamics. A gazelle spotting a lion performs a stotting display, leaping high into the air. It's not escape behavior. It's a signal. I'm strong, fast, and healthy. Don't waste energy chasing me. Predators often heed the warning and move on, but signals can be faked, and screens can fail. A job candidate rehearses perfect answers yet struggles in practice. A company flashes green credentials but pollutes in secret. A dating profile glows with curated perfection that reality can't match. This arms race creates ever more elaborate signals and screens, sometimes so complex they obscure what truly matters. And when interests diverge, when one player acts for themselves at the cost of the one they represent, the game evolves into something even more complex, the principal-agent problem, where trust and incentives collide. Bounded rationality. A CEO announces a bold new vision: cost-cutting, innovation, long-term growth. Investors cheer. Employees brace for layoffs. Behind closed doors, division managers quietly shift priorities, not toward the vision, but toward hitting quarterly targets to secure their bonuses. This isn't incompetence. It's a classic case of the principal-agent problem. In game theory, this happens whenever one player, the principal, hires another, the agent, to act on their behalf. The principal relies on the agent's judgment, but their interests don't always align. You see it in corporations. Shareholders, principals, want long-term value. CEOs, agents might focus on short-term stock prices, knowing their compensation depends on it. You see it in politics. Citizens, principals, elect representatives, agents to govern responsibly. But once in power, some politicians prioritize re-election, lobbying deals, or personal gain. Even in healthcare, the dynamic appears. Patients trust doctors to recommend the best treatments. But if financial incentives reward certain procedures or prescriptions, conflicts of interest can creep in. Why is this so hard to fix? Because of information asymmetry. Principals often can't observe agents directly. Investors don't know every corporate decision. Voters can't monitor every legislative meeting. Patients lack medical expertise. This creates room for moral hazard, where agents take risks or actions the principal wouldn't approve of because they don't bear the full consequences. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Banks acted as agents for their clients, promising to manage money prudently. But behind the scenes, they bundled risky loans into complex securities, chasing short-term profits while passing long-term risks to investors and taxpayers. When the bubble burst, principals paid the price. But the principal-agent problem isn't just a systemic issue, it's personal too. Think of a parent hiring a babysitter. The parent wants attentive care. The sitter may prioritize screen time and texting friends unless monitored, or a manager delegating a project. Without clear incentives or oversight, the team may cut corners or delay deliverables. Solutions exist, but they're tricky. Hover T's, incentive alignment, link agent rewards to principal goals. Stock options tie CEO pay to shareholder success. Monitoring and transparency, audits, performance reviews, and reporting systems limit unchecked actions. Fallacy, contracts and penalties. Carefully written agreements can deter misaligned behavior, but too much rigidity stifles initiative. Yet over-regulation creates its own traps. Excessive oversight can breed mistrust, inefficiency, and even encourage agents to hide their actions. And now, with the rise of autonomous systems and AI, the principal-agent problem enters a new era. Algorithms act on human goals, but their interpretations can be dangerously literal or subtly biased. When the agent isn't even human, how do you ensure alignment? In the end, this game teaches a sobering lesson. Trust isn't enough. Systems must be designed to align incentives, or players will act rationally against each other's interests. But what happens when everyone's incentives are aligned, yet they're stuck in a system that rewards short-term gains at long-term cost? That's when rational behavior leads to collective ruin, a dynamic we already explored in Commons Dilemmas, but now in reverse, players need irrational foresight to break free. Sunk cost fallacy. Imagine standing in a grocery aisle faced with 57 brands of cereal. You compare prices, nutrition, taste preferences, but as you weigh options, fatigue creeps in. Eventually, you grab the familiar box, not because it's the best choice, but because you're overwhelmed. This isn't laziness, it's bounded rationality. Coined by economist Herbert Simon, bounded rationality acknowledges a simple truth: players aren't perfect calculators. Real people face limits of time, information, and mental capacity. In classical game theory, players are hyper-rational. They know all possible moves, outcomes, and probabilities. But in reality, we navigate complexity with heuristics, mental shortcuts that trade precision for speed. Consider a company entering a new market. Ideally, executives would analyze every competitor, regulation, and consumer trend. But markets shift too fast, so they rely on rules of thumb, imitate leaders, avoid high-risk regions, follow gut instincts. Sometimes these heuristics succeed. More often, they create blind spots. Kodak clung to film photography, failing to predict digital disruption. Blockbuster dismissed streaming as a niche. Both choices felt rational within their leaders' cognitive bounds, until they weren't. Bounded rationality explains why we misjudge risk, why people fear plane crashes more than car accidents, why investors panic sell during market dips but hold risky stocks out of optimism, why climate change feels distant until floods swamp city streets. It's not that players lack logic, it's that their logic operates within a narrow window bounded by what they notice, remember, and emotionally process. Nature, too, is full of boundedly rational players. In predator-prey dynamics, animals don't calculate every possible move. They use simple rules: run if movement is fast, hunt at dawn. These evolved heuristics work well until they don't. A species may overgraze, overhunt, or fail to adapt to a sudden change. Humans inherited similar mental tools. Early ancestors evolved to prioritize immediate threats and rewards, food today over security decades away. In the modern world, this ancient wiring struggles with abstract problems like nuclear proliferation or melting ice caps. But bounded rationality isn't just a flaw, it's a survival strategy. In a world too complex to compute fully, good enough decisions often outperform perfect ones made too late. Simon called this satisficing. choosing the first option that meets acceptable criteria instead of searching endlessly for the best. Yet in some systems, satisficing leads to tragedy. Consider antibiotic overuse. Doctors prescribe just to be safe. Patients demand quick cures. Each individual decision seems rational, but collectively it fuels resistance, creating superbugs that threaten everyone, or traffic. Drivers choose shortcuts to save time. Each choice feels efficient. Together, they clog side streets, lengthen commutes, and worsen pollution. The game's hidden lesson: players aren't just limited, they're embedded in systems too vast for anyone to fully grasp. And in such systems, logic alone isn't enough. To survive, we need institutions, norms, and technologies that extend our cognitive reach. Because in some games, the cost of limited foresight isn't inefficiency, it's collapse. But even when players see collapse coming, they often double down, trapped by sunk costs and emotional investments. This is the next trap: escalation of commitment, when logic gives way to stubbornness. Mental accounting. It starts small. A project runs over budget. A relationship hits a rough patch. A war meant to end in weeks drags into years. At each crossroads, the players face the same choice: cut losses and walk away, or push forward to justify what's already been spent. Time, money, pride, lives. Too often they choose to stay the course. This is escalation of commitment, a psychological trap where sunk costs make players double down on failing strategies. It's why people keep investing in bad stocks, keep repairing a car that breaks monthly, keep fighting wars that can't be won. Quitting feels like defeat. Continuing feels like redemption. In 1961, U.S. advisors warned that Vietnam was becoming a quagmire. Yet year after year, troops and resources surged. Leaders feared the political cost of withdrawal more than the human cost of escalation. By the end, millions were dead, and the U.S. withdrew anyway, proving that persistence doesn't guarantee victory. Businesses aren't immune. In the 1990s, the Concorde supersonic jet faced ballooning costs and tepid demand. But France and Britain pressed on, citing the billions already invested. Economists now call this the Concorde fallacy, when decision-makers mistake unrecoverable past costs for reasons to continue. Even in everyday life, the trap is familiar. A couple stays in a crumbling relationship because they've been together too long to quit now. A student continues a degree they no longer love because "I've already put in 2 years." Gamblers chase losses, believing the next hand will turn the tide. Each choice feels rational, honoring past investments. But the costs are gone. Only future losses remain. Why do players fall into this? Because of loss aversion, the pain of losing feels twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining. Because of ego, admitting failure threatens identity. And because of social pressure, walking away can look like cowardice. In game theory, this can be catastrophic. When both players escalate, each move traps them further. Wars of attrition, price wars, and even social media arguments spiral because quitting means letting the other side win. Breaking free requires brutal honesty. Smart players ignore sunk costs and focus only on future payoffs. The best question isn't "what have we spent?" but "what will we gain if we keep going?" Some leaders even design systems to prevent escalation: preset exit conditions, automatic budget caps, or independent oversight. But the hardest escape is psychological. It means embracing loss as part of the game, not a verdict on your worth. Because in many games, stubbornness isn't strength, it's a slow bleed. And when players refuse to cut losses, they often warp their logic, rationalizing ever riskier moves to avoid regret. This leads us straight into the next cognitive trap: mental accounting. Why money isn't just money. Loss aversion. You find a $50 bill on the street. Later that evening, you splurge on dessert, telling yourself, it's free money anyway. But would you have bought it if the same $50 came from your paycheck? This is mental accounting, a quirk of human psychology where we treat money differently depending on how we label it. Economist Richard Thaler first described this phenomenon in the 1980s. He noticed that people don't think of money as one fungible pool. Instead, we divide it into mental accounts, savings, fun, emergencies, windfalls. Each account carries its own rules. Lottery winnings feel like play money. Tax refunds spark vacations. But a salary feels sacred, tied to hard work and responsibility. Even in high-stakes arenas, this quirk shapes decisions. Take casinos. A gambler wins $500 and starts betting larger sums, calling it house money. Logically, every dollar is equally valuable. But emotionally, it's easier to risk what feels unearned or consider investors. When a stock drops below its purchase price, many hold on to it stubbornly, hoping to break even. This mental account, anchored to a purchase price, leads to poor decisions, ignoring better opportunities elsewhere. Businesses suffer from this too. Departments with leftover annual budgets often scramble to spend before the fiscal year ends, fearing cuts if funds go unused. It's called use it or lose it budgeting. Logical? No. But once money is labeled as this year's budget, it becomes psychologically distinct from next year's. In households, the same game plays out. Parents save diligently for a vacation fund, but balk at using emergency savings for car repairs, even though rationally both are just dollars in an account. Mental labels override arithmetic. And in relationships, partners may argue over my money versus our money, despite living under the same roof. These mental boundaries often outlast legal ones. Even governments aren't immune. In public finance, tax revenues from lotteries or sin taxes are often earmarked for education or healthcare because voters prefer new money to go toward good causes. Yet in reality, money is fungible. Labeling creates political comfort, not economic efficiency, but mental accounting isn't always bad. It helps people manage complexity. By partitioning resources, we resist temptation. A strict do-not-touch savings account reduces impulsive spending. Envelope budgeting, assigning cash to categories like groceries or entertainment, works because it exploits our psychological tendency to treat each envelope as a finite resource. Still, the trap emerges when mental labels blind us to trade-offs. People borrow at 20% interest on credit cards while letting savings sit idle at 1%. They cling to vacation funds while neglecting urgent bills. Rationally, all dollars should be equal. Emotionally, they aren't. The lesson? Every player has cognitive accounts. The smartest learn to see through them, treating money as a single pool serving their future goals, not as sacred buckets shaped by emotion. But escaping mental traps is hard. And in the next chapter, we'll confront the one most players dread: regret minimization, how we make choices not to succeed, but to avoid hating ourselves later. Fairness and ultimatum games. Imagine this. I hand you $100. You're smiling already. Then I flip a coin. Heads, you win another $100. Tails, you lose the $100 I gave you. Would you take the gamble? Most people wouldn't. Even though the math says the odds are fair, something deeper resists. Losing hurts more than winning feels good. This isn't a flaw in your calculator. It's loss aversion, a cornerstone of human psychology. In the 1970s, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky ran experiments that revealed this hidden bias. People didn't treat gains and losses equally. The pain of losing $100 felt twice as intense as the joy of gaining it. This insight became the foundation of prospect theory, which shattered classical economics' assumption of rational players. We're not utility maximizers. We're loss minimizers. Loss aversion explains countless real-world behaviors. Why do investors hold on to losing stocks too long, hoping they'll bounce back? Selling would mean locking in the loss, turning regret into reality. Why do athletes play more aggressively when defending a lead than when chasing one? Studies of professional soccer show players are more likely to change tactics out of fear of losing a tie than hope of winning. Why do people buy extended warranties on electronics they'll likely never need? The small cost feels justified compared to the imagined horror of an unexpected breakdown. Even politics runs on this bias. Candidates frame policies not as gain, sir, we'll improve healthcare, but as losses avoided, you won't lose access to care. Fear of losing what you already have motivates voters more than promises of new benefits. Marketing teams exploit it too. Limited time offer. Don't miss out. Scarcity isn't always real, but your brain responds as if it is. But there's a twist. Prospect theory also shows that once losses are perceived as inevitable, players flip. Risk-averse in gains, they become risk-seeking in losses. This explains desperate Hail Mary moves by failing companies. Or why gamblers double their bets after losing streaks, chasing the win that will erase their pain. Even in relationships, loss aversion shows up. A partner clings to a toxic relationship because leaving feels like losing years of investment. Friends stay silent during conflicts to avoid losing harmony, even if the silence breeds resentment. But this isn't just individual psychology, it scales up to entire systems. Nations hesitate to reform failing institutions because reform means abandoning old structures. Businesses cling to outdated models because pivoting risks existing revenue streams. Sometimes the fear of loss locks everyone into stasis, even when change could lead to greater gains. The lesson of prospect theory is haunting. We don't fear risk, we fear regret. We don't chase wealth, we chase security. We're not rational calculators. We're storytellers, trying to preserve the chapters we've already written. But what happens when fairness, not gain or loss, drives decisions? When players reject profitable deals simply because they feel unfair? That's where we enter the world of ultimatum games, where emotions like anger and dignity shape outcomes more than logic ever could. Voting paradoxes. You and I are playing a game. I have $100 to split between us, but I decide how much you get. You can accept or reject my offer. If you accept, we both get paid. If you reject, neither of us gets anything. I offer you $10. You refuse. Rational? Not by classical economics. $10 is better than nothing. But your gut says no. You'd rather burn the money than reward my greed. This is the ultimatum game, a simple setup with profound implications. When researchers first ran it, they expected players to accept any non-zero offer. Instead, offers below 20 to 30% were often rejected. Lowballing was punished, even at personal cost. It turns out humans value fairness as much as profit. In workplaces, this plays out when employees refuse small raises out of resentment. The raise isn't zero, it's still a gain. But if it feels insulting compared to a colleague's bonus, rejection comes in subtler forms: disengagement, quiet quitting, even sabotage. In friendships, we see it when someone offers help begrudgingly. The recipient declines, preferring to struggle alone rather than accept crumbs of generosity. Even in politics, nations reject trade deals that seem lopsided, not because there's no benefit, but because dignity trumps utility. But why do we do this? Because fairness is wired into us. Neuroscientists found that unfair offers activate the brain's insula, a region linked to disgust. Rejecting them lights up reward centers, suggesting that punishment itself is satisfying. This isn't just social conditioning. It's evolutionary. In early human groups, fairness kept alliances stable. Cheaters and hoarders endangered the group. Punishing them, even at a cost, preserved social cohesion. Yet there's a flip side. Fairness perceptions aren't universal. What feels unfair in one culture might seem generous in another. In small, tight-knit societies, even tiny imbalances can spark conflict. In large, anonymous markets, players tolerate inequities as long as rules appear impartial. Modern platforms exploit this psychology. Ride-sharing apps use algorithms to split fares between drivers and companies. When drivers perceive the split as unfair, they organize strikes, even though earnings from a day's work are still positive. Online marketplaces face similar dynamics. Sellers rebel against fee structures they perceive as disproportionate. The Ultimatum game also hints at why negotiations fail. One side offers terms that, on paper, are beneficial, but the other side rejects out of pride. Deals collapse. Wars ignite. Compromises that should work fail because no one wants to be seen as the loser. In game theory, this reveals a painful truth. Players aren't calculators, they're human, and humans will sacrifice to punish those who violate shared norms. The smartest players understand this and bake fairness into their offers, not out of altruism, but because cooperation depends on perceived equity. But fairness alone doesn't save complex systems. Sometimes even fair rules can't prevent chaos when large groups try to coordinate without a clear signal. This is where we step into voting paradoxes, why democracy itself often breaks in ways no one expects. Coordination failures. You're part of a committee choosing a new office coffee machine. 3 options are on the table. Half the team prefers Espresso X. A third wants Brewmaster. A small but vocal minority backs Perk Pro. A vote is held. Espressix wins. But then someone suggests pairwise voting, comparing 2 machines at a time. Brewmaster beats Espressix head-to-head. Perk Pro beats Brewmaster. And in a bizarre twist, Espressix beats Perk Pro. This isn't bad math. It's Condorcet's paradox, a voting loop where collective preferences cycle endlessly, even though individual preferences are consistent. Voting feels simple. Count choices, declare a winner. But in reality, group decisions often warp under the weight of competing interests. Take national elections. In 2000, Ralph Nader's candidacy split progressive votes, handing George W. Bush a razor-thin victory. This is vote splitting, where similar candidates divide support, letting an opponent win despite minority popularity. In France's 2002 presidential race, vote splitting on the left allowed far-right candidate Jean-Marie Le Pen to advance to the runoff. But paradoxes aren't just for politics. At work, teams use democracy to make decisions, only to end up with results no one loves. Why? Because the voting method subtly favors compromise candidates or extreme ones, depending on its design. In social circles, friends vote on where to eat. Preferences cycle endlessly. The winner isn't the best choice, it's the one people are least unwilling to fight over. Game theory shows that voting systems themselves are games. Players strategize, form coalitions, or even vote insincerely to prevent their least favorite outcome. This is called strategic voting, voting not for your favorite but for the lesser evil, most likely to win. It's rational, but it distorts results. Mathematician Kenneth Arrow took this further. His impossibility theorem proved that no voting system can satisfy all fairness criteria. Saladiwa, respect individual preferences. Tuan Saladiwa, avoid dictatorships. Tangfar when remain consistent when adding irrelevant alternatives. Choose any two, and the third will fail. In other words, perfect democracy is mathematically impossible. But does that mean group decision-making is doomed? Not entirely. Some systems minimize paradoxes. Ranked choice voting lets voters rank preferences, reducing spoilers. Approval voting softens strategic dilemmas. Yet even these designs face trade-offs: simplicity versus fairness, speed versus depth. The haunting lesson is this: democracy isn't a fixed ideal. It's a fragile mechanism, shaped by rules, culture, and psychology. Change the rules, and you change the game. And when systems fail, not from malice, but from coordination breakdowns, the result isn't just unfairness, it's chaos. This brings us to the next layer: coordination failures, how systems collapse even without betrayal. Reputation systems. Imagine a busy intersection where traffic lights suddenly fail. Cars creep forward cautiously. A few drivers inch ahead trying to cross. Others hesitate. Honks erupt. Tensions rise. And within minutes, gridlock. No one intended chaos. No one broke rules maliciously, but the system collapsed anyway. This is a coordination failure, a breakdown that happens not because players betray each other, but because they can't align their actions. In game theory, these failures lurk in systems where individual decisions depend heavily on expectations of others. Each player waits for a signal that never comes. Take currency crises. When investors fear a currency might devalue, they rush to sell. Their collective selling pressures the currency further, triggering the very collapse they feared. Rational individuals acting defensively create an irrational stampede. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis saw economies across Southeast Asia spiral when investors fled en masse. No conspiracy, no betrayal, just a failure to coordinate confidence. The same dynamic unfolds during bank runs. Each depositor, fearing the bank's insolvency, withdraws funds to protect themselves. But if all depositors had stayed calm, the bank would have remained solvent. Panic transforms fear into reality. Coordination failures haunt environmental efforts too. Everyone agrees that reducing carbon emissions is necessary. Yet each nation hesitates, fearing economic disadvantage if rivals don't cooperate. The result? A global system locked in stasis, inching toward ecological disaster. Even in personal life, these failures appear. Think of social movements where individuals want change but hesitate to act alone. Everyone waits for someone else to start. Without a visible leader or early adopters, momentum stalls. Change remains an idea, never a reality. Or workplaces where collaboration fails, not because employees are unwilling, but because roles and expectations remain unclear. Projects languish as each team assumes others are leading. Why do these breakdowns happen? Because systems rely on common knowledge, not just knowing something, but knowing everyone else knows it, and knowing they know you know it. Without this recursive awareness, players hesitate. This is illustrated by Schelling points, natural focal points that help players align without communication. Meeting in a foreign city? Most people head to the main square. In business, standards like USB ports or QWERTY keyboards became Schelling points, enabling mass coordination without a central authority. But when no clear focal point exists, coordination unravels. Smart systems design around this. Traffic lights, market regulations, social norms, all act as invisible guides, synchronizing millions of micro-decisions into collective order. Without them, even well-meaning players descend into gridlock. The haunting truth? Collapse doesn't require villains. It only requires players trapped in mutual hesitation. But there's one force that can prevent these spirals: reputation. When players know their actions today shape how others treat them tomorrow, they find reasons to act cooperatively, even without explicit coordination. And in a world where trust is fragile, reputation becomes the most valuable currency of all. Arrow's theorem. A merchant in 14th century Venice loads spices onto a ship bound for Constantinople. He doesn't pay up front. Instead, he writes a letter of credit, his name alone securing the deal. Why would the seller risk it? Because reputation travels faster than ships. In pre-modern trade, a single dishonest deal could ruin a name for generations. Merchants knew their most valuable asset wasn't gold or goods. It was trust. Even today, reputation acts as an invisible currency in every system where players interact repeatedly. Unlike money, it can't be spent directly, but it greases the wheels of cooperation, opening doors and diffusing suspicion. Online platforms have codified this ancient mechanism. On eBay, seller ratings shape buyer decisions. One negative review can slash sales. On Airbnb, hosts and guests both leave ratings, creating a two-way trust loop. On Uber, drivers and passengers alike are scored, making reputation a form of behavioral control. These systems work not because players are naturally honest, but because the threat of reputational loss disciplines behavior. But reputation isn't always fair. Algorithms can amplify biases. A single bad interaction, whether justified or not, can tank a small business's Yelp score. Fake reviews muddy the waters, making it harder for players to discern real trustworthiness. In communities, gossip serves as an analog reputation system. It reinforces norms, but can also punish outsiders unfairly. A neighbor who's slightly eccentric becomes unreliable. A student who makes one mistake becomes lazy. These labels stick, shaping future interactions. Even biology leverages reputation. In primate groups, individuals who share food or groom others gain allies. Those who steal or shirk are excluded from protection. Among cleaner fish, clients avoid cheaters who bite instead of cleaning, favoring honest partners. But there's a paradox. Reputation systems stabilize cooperation, but also create fragility. Players may prioritize appearances over substance, performing generosity for visibility while acting selfishly in private. Companies greenwash to protect brands. Politicians virtue signal to appeal to voters. And once lost, reputation is hard to regain. Trust builds slowly but collapses instantly. Designers of modern platforms grapple with this. Should reputation be permanent, like a scar, or flexible, allowing redemption? Too rigid, and players give up trying to improve. Too forgiving, and bad actors exploit second chances. The lesson is subtle but powerful. Trust doesn't emerge from nowhere. It's built, measured, and traded. An economy running parallel to the visible one. And in systems where fairness itself is in question, reputation alone can't fix the flaws. Sometimes, even perfectly honest players can't agree on what's fair, because no voting system can ever satisfy every fairness criterion. This brings us to the mathematical heart of democratic frustration, Arrow's impossibility theorem. The metagame. Imagine you're helping friends decide on a restaurant. 3 choices: sushi, pizza, or burgers. Half the group prefers sushi over pizza, pizza over burgers. Another half likes burgers over sushi, sushi over pizza. A small group loves pizza most, but detests sushi. You tally votes. Sushi wins, but swap in pairwise voting. Pizza beats sushi head-to-head. Then burgers beat pizza. Suddenly, your winner isn't so clear. This isn't a quirky scenario. It's a symptom of something profound. There is no perfect way to aggregate preferences. In the 1950s, economist Kenneth Arrow proved this mathematically. His impossibility theorem showed that no voting system can satisfy all fairness criteria when more than 2 options exist. Arrow's fairness rules were intuitive. If everyone prefers A to B, the group should too. Irrelevant alternatives shouldn't change outcomes. No single voter should dictate results. Simple, right? But Arrow showed these can't all coexist. Some must break. This isn't abstract. It plays out in real elections. In 2000, U.S. voters saw Ralph Nader split progressive votes, helping George W. Bush win despite Al Gore's popularity. In France 2002, multiple left-wing candidates diluted votes, propelling a far-right candidate into a runoff. This is vote splitting, where an added choice reshuffles outcomes, violating Arrow's second criterion. Even outside politics, Arrow's paradox surfaces. In award shows, committees vote for best film or best album. But preference cycles and strategic voting can push consensus choices aside in favor of polarizing ones. Or consider corporate boards choosing CEOs. Members rank candidates differently, and small changes in preferences can flip the result entirely. Some systems try to dodge the paradox. Ranked choice voting used in Australia allows voters to rank preferences, reducing spoilers. But it struggles when voters have cyclical preferences. Approval voting, used in some professional societies, lets voters support as many options as they like, yet it encourages strategic voting, approving only strong favorites to avoid aiding rivals. Arrow's theorem doesn't mean democracy is hopeless. It means trade-offs are inevitable. Designers must prioritize one salon when simplicity or resistance to manipulation, one salon when majority rule or protection for minorities, one salon when speed or deliberation. Each system reflects cultural values as much as mathematical rules, but Arrow's insight ripples beyond voting. Any system aggregating individual preferences, credit ratings, search engine rankings, even dating app algorithms faces similar tensions. Weight one factor too heavily, and distortions appear, balance perfectly, and no one is fully satisfied. Reflexive control. You've seen the moves, you've learned the strategies, but step back for a moment. What if the real game isn't on the board? What if it's about the board? Welcome to the metagame, the realm where players stop playing and start rewriting the rules, where strategies evolve not in response to opponents, but in anticipation of entirely new systems. In the metagame, power isn't just in making the right move, it's in deciding which moves even exist. This part isn't about prisoners choosing whether to cooperate. It's about civilizations deciding what cooperation means. It isn't about companies competing in markets. It's about regulators designing those markets. And it's not just theoretical. From global climate negotiations to the rise of AI, the metagame is unfolding around you right now. In the chapters ahead, we'll see how players manipulate perception itself, how hidden information warps every choice, and how some games aren't meant to end. We'll explore evolutionary strategies encoded in DNA, the civilizational dilemmas shaping our species, and the final question every player must ask: can we escape the bad games we've built? Because understanding game theory isn't just about winning. It's about realizing that in some games, the smartest move is to change the game entirely. Information asymmetry. Imagine a chess game where you never touch a piece. Instead, you convince your opponent that moving their queen is dangerous, even when it isn't. Slowly, they trap themselves in a cage of their own fears. This isn't science fiction. It's reflexive control, a strategy where the goal isn't to beat opponents outright, but to make them play your game without realizing it. The concept was formalized during the Cold War by Soviet military theorists. Reflexive control meant feeding adversaries carefully crafted information to shape their decisions in predictable ways. The Soviets leaked plans for non-existent weapons systems, forcing the US to waste resources countering ghosts. They staged military exercises designed less to train troops and more to manipulate NATO's perception of their strength. The genius of reflexive control lies in its subtlety. If deception is a bold lie, reflexive control is a whisper, a nudge that makes your rival choose the wrong path willingly. But this isn't confined to geopolitics. In business, companies deploy similar tactics. A tech giant announces a revolutionary product still years from release, freezing competitor innovation as they scramble to prepare for vaporware. A startup leaks a funding round valuation far above reality, shaping investor perceptions and discouraging rivals from entering the space. In relationships, people do it too, dropping hints, setting expectations, framing choices to guide others without overt pressure. A partner says, "Do what you want," knowing the tone alone will steer the decision. Online, reflexive control has taken on new forms. Social media bots flood platforms with polarizing content. The goal isn't persuasion, it's creating noise, eroding trust, and nudging people toward predictable outrage. In this game, players aren't just fighting for truth, they're fighting to define reality itself. Game theory exposes the mechanics behind these maneuvers. Players aren't limited to direct actions. They can influence payoffs, rewrite perceptions of risk, even obscure the true game being played. A company facing a labor strike might publicly overstate financial hardship to pressure unions into softer demands. A politician frames a policy debate not on its merits, but on tribal identity, forcing opponents to defend themselves within a rigged narrative. But there's a risk. Reflexive strategies require precision. Push too hard, and opponents realize the manipulation, becoming unpredictable or retaliatory. Done poorly, the whisper becomes a shout, and the game collapses into chaos. In the end, reflexive control teaches us something unsettling. The smartest players don't just move pieces, they manipulate the entire board. And in a world of hidden hands and invisible games, players often find themselves acting with partial information, never knowing who's bluffing, who's honest, or who's playing 3 levels above them. This takes us to the next layer of the metagame: information asymmetry, playing with hidden cards. Hidden risks and bad incentives. Picture a poker table. You've got a decent hand, 2 pair, but your opponent keeps raising. Are they holding a flush, or are they bluffing? Every chip you commit feels like stepping onto thin ice, and yet folding might mean surrendering a pot you could have won. This is the tension of information asymmetry, where one player knows more than the other, and every move is a guess cloaked in risk. In poker, the stakes are clear. But in life, the stakes are often much higher, and the hidden cards aren't just aces and kings. When a used car salesman smiles, is he hiding a history of breakdowns? When a job applicant lists glowing credentials, do they mask weaknesses behind buzzwords? When a nation mobilizes troops, is it preparing for defense or deception? Economist George Akerlof captured this dynamic in his seminal paper, The Market for Lemons. He described how buyers of used cars, unable to tell good vehicles from bad ones, assume every car is a potential lemon. Sellers of quality cars, unable to get fair value, leave the market. What remains is a pool of poor quality cars, and trust spirals downward. This isn't just about cars. Insurance markets suffer the same fate. When only those expecting high medical costs buy coverage, premiums skyrocket, driving out healthier customers. The system tilts under its own weight. In negotiations, information asymmetry is a weapon. A company selling itself to a larger competitor may overstate future earnings. An investor hides true valuations to secure a better deal. Even on dating apps, carefully curated profiles create illusions that only dissolve after months or years. And in war, the stakes of hidden information are existential. During the Gulf War, Iraqi forces deployed decoy tanks and radio signals to confuse Allied intelligence. For days, planners couldn't distinguish between real battalions and ghost armies. The cost of acting, or not acting, was measured in lives. But the danger of asymmetric games isn't just in who wins, it's in how systems erode when trust evaporates. If players believe others are hiding too much, they stop playing fair themselves. Markets collapse, relationships fracture. Even entire societies can fall into paranoia and gridlock. Solutions exist, but they're imperfect. Reputation systems help, but as we've seen, they can be gamed. Regulations and disclosures impose transparency, but only as far as players comply. Screening and signaling emerge as strategic responses: credit scores, reference checks, product warranties, even humble gestures of goodwill. Each is an attempt to light up a corner of the shadowy room where the real game unfolds. But in some games, it's not just about hidden information, it's about hidden incentives, where players know the risks, but let others pay the price. And when systems reward recklessness, even rational players act against the collective good. It's here that we encounter the tangled world of adverse selection and moral hazard, where unseen risks and misaligned incentives tilt entire systems off balance. Infinite games. A bank offers mortgages to anyone with a pulse. The riskier the borrower, the higher the interest rate, and the bigger the potential profit. On paper, it's brilliant. In practice, it helped spark the 2008 financial collapse. This is the reality of adverse selection and moral hazard, two hidden forces that distort systems when incentives don't align with outcomes. Adverse selection happens when one party in a transaction has more information than the other and uses it. Think of health insurance. Healthy people opt out because premiums feel too high for their low risk. Sick people, expecting higher costs, buy in eagerly. The insurer's pool fills with high-risk customers, premiums rise further, and eventually the system begins to collapse. It's not malice, it's rational behavior in a flawed system. Moral hazard takes it a step further. When players don't bear the full consequences of their risks, they act more recklessly. A driver with full insurance may park carelessly, knowing repairs won't cost them. A bank confident in a government bailout may gamble with risky loans, believing taxpayers will foot the bill if bets go bad. The 2008 crisis wasn't just bad luck, it was moral hazard institutionalized. Mortgage brokers earned commissions regardless of loan quality. Banks packaged toxic loans into securities, passing the risk to investors. When the bubble burst, executives walked away with bonuses while millions lost homes. But these dynamics don't just haunt Wall Street. In relationships, someone may take emotional risks, neglect, betrayal, because they believe forgiveness is guaranteed. In companies, employees with no stake in long-term success may focus only on short-term targets. Even in governments, leaders approve policies knowing they'll be out of office long before the consequences arrive. Fixing these traps isn't easy. Regulations can curb reckless behavior, but often breed resistance. Incentive alignment, like tying executive pay to long-term performance, helps but only if oversight prevents gaming the system. And in some arenas, no external enforcer exists. Nations negotiating climate action face a classic moral hazard. Why cut emissions if others don't? Each delay feels rational, yet collectively it pushes humanity closer to disaster. What makes these traps so insidious is their invisibility. The players aren't villains, they're acting logically within their local rules. But when the rules reward bad behavior, even good players turn toxic. And sometimes, the only way to escape is to step outside the current game entirely, to imagine a frame where winning isn't the goal anymore. That idea takes us somewhere stranger, where some games are designed not to end at all. Evolutionary game theory. You're playing chess. The rules are clear. The board has boundaries. The goal is simple. Checkmate your opponent. When it's over, you shake hands and walk away. Now imagine a different kind of game. There's no board, no fixed rules, no final move. The only goal is to keep playing, to keep others playing, and to evolve the rules as you go. That's an infinite game. Most of life's games feel finite. We chase diplomas, promotions, championships, elections. Each has winners and losers. Each has an endpoint. But some of the most important arenas aren't like that at all. A marriage isn't won at the wedding. It grows or withers based on how both players show up every day. Parenting doesn't end when a child turns 18. Even science doesn't have a final discovery. Every answer leads to new questions. These are infinite games. They have no finish line. In business, the difference is stark. Companies playing finite games obsess over beating competitors this quarter. They slash costs, squeeze employees, and trumpet short-term victories. But companies playing infinite games focus on resilience. They build trust with customers, nurture talent, invest in systems that may not pay off immediately. Amazon operated at a loss for years, prioritizing long-term growth over quarterly wins. Toyota spent decades refining processes instead of chasing headlines. Both outlasted flashier rivals. In our personal lives, finite thinking traps us. We treat careers like ladders, scrambling to the top, only to ask, now what? We treat relationships like prizes, believing winning someone's heart is the end point. But infinite players see differently. They understand that success isn't about crossing a finish line, it's about sustaining, nurturing, adapting. Yet infinite games are fragile. They require players to resist short-term victories that wreck the larger system. A politician polarizing voters may win the election, but harm the democracy that enabled their rise. A logging company may clear-cut forests for profits, leaving nothing for future generations. Winning isn't worth much if the game ends after you leave the board. Infinite players think beyond themselves. They ask, what rules keep this game alive? How do we play so others can too? It's not an easy mindset. It demands sacrifice, patience, and humility. But it's the only way to avoid turning every field, relationships, businesses, even civilizations into scorched earth. And as strange as it sounds, nature may be the greatest infinite player of all. Species rise and fall, but ecosystems persist by evolving new balances, new patterns, new players. Perhaps the lesson isn't about winning or losing. It's about becoming part of something larger, something that outlasts any individual move. Tragedy of the commons revisited. On the African savanna, two species of gazelles coexist. One evolves to sprint faster than any predator. The other evolves to live in large herds, confusing attackers through sheer numbers. Which strategy is better? The answer depends on the game. Evolutionary game theory isn't about conscious choices. It's about strategies encoded in genes, behaviors, and even cultures tested over generations in the harshest arenas imaginable. Unlike classical game theory, there's no final winner. The players are populations, and their success is measured in survival and reproduction. Take hawks and doves. Imagine a population of animals competing for food. Hawks always fight aggressively. Doves avoid conflict, sharing or retreating when challenged. At first, hawks thrive. They dominate every encounter. But as hawk numbers grow, fights become costly. Wounded hawks can't hunt or mate. Meanwhile, doves, though submissive, avoid injury and start to flourish. Over time, the system reaches a balance. Neither strategy wipes out the other. This is an evolutionarily stable strategy. ESS, a mix of behaviors that resists invasion by alternatives. But in nature, strategies aren't fixed. They evolve endlessly. Male cuttlefish, for example, compete for mates. Large males display aggressively to intimidate rivals, but smaller males sometimes adopt a different tactic. They camouflage as females, slipping past dominant males to fertilize eggs unnoticed. Both strategies persist because each works under certain conditions. Humans aren't exempt from these dynamics. In economics, small businesses coexist with corporate giants. Giants dominate through scale, but small firms survive by innovating quickly, occupying niches too narrow for large players. In politics, aggressive populists rise during instability, but in times of peace, consensus builders often prevail. Societies oscillate, adapting to changing pressures. Even memes and ideas evolve this way. Simple, shareable messages spread like viral infections. Complex, nuanced ideas move more slowly but can endure within tight-knit communities. Viruses themselves play evolutionary games. The common cold spreads easily because it's mild. Sick hosts keep moving, infecting others. Ebola burns hot, but often dies out quickly as hosts perish or isolate. COVID-19's variants show an arms race of transmissibility versus immunity, each wave shifting the population's strategic balance. Evolutionary game theory also reveals cooperation as a winning strategy. In bacterial colonies, some cells produce antibiotics to fend off competitors. This benefits the whole group, but comes at a cost to producers. If too many free-ride, the colony weakens. Here, strategies evolve to balance self-interest and group survival. And in human history, tribal societies often punish freeloaders, ensuring hunters share meat and warriors defend the group. This isn't charity. It's an evolved system, keeping cooperation stable under pressure. The lesson is both inspiring and unsettling. The strategies that survive aren't always the strongest or smartest. They're the ones that fit their environment best, even if that means deception, cooperation, aggression, or retreat. In a rapidly changing world, adaptability itself may be the only true ESS. And what happens when an entire species like ours must confront shared challenges on a planetary scale? What games are we playing with the atmosphere, oceans, and resources that sustain us? That's where the tragedy of the commons reemerges, not as a metaphor but as a civilizational reality. Civilizational prisoner's dilemma. In the 19th century, farmers overgrazed shared pastures until nothing remained. That was the original tragedy of the commons. Today, the pasture is the earth itself. Every nation burns fossil fuels, clears forests, and draws water from shared aquifers. Each act seems small. Each feels justified. But together they nudge global systems, climate, biodiversity, oceans toward collapse. This isn't a story about a few bad actors. It's about rational players trapped in a flawed game. The atmosphere doesn't care who emits carbon dioxide. One factory, one plane flight, one city's lights are negligible. But when 7 billion players act the same way, the collective result is unavoidable. The paradox. No single player can fix the system alone, yet every player acting in self-interest ensures its ruin. Unlike local commons dilemmas, the global version has unique challenges. Time lags. Emissions today heat the planet decades later. Diffuse responsibility. No single polluter feels the full consequence. Unequal stakes. Low-lying nations drown first while richer ones delay action. Game theory exposes why progress is so hard. Cutting emissions feels like unilateral disarmament. A country reducing coal use faces higher costs, while rivals gain competitive advantage. Like players in an iterated prisoner's dilemma, nations defect not from malice, but from fear of being left behind. And yet, there are signs of infinite thinking breaking through. International agreements like the Paris Accord attempt to rewrite incentives, rewarding cooperation and penalizing defection. Carbon markets put a price on emissions, creating a new currency where restraint becomes valuable. But enforcement remains fragile. Without trust and transparency, promises are cheap. Cheaters prosper until the whole system unravels. Corporations play their own commons games. Overfishing devastates oceans, not because companies hate fish, but because every player fears leaving profit on the table. The result, cod stocks collapse, tuna populations plummet, reefs bleach. Solutions here mirror nature's own checks. Quotas, protected zones, shared governance. But success depends on players believing the game is worth playing for generations, not just quarterly profits. Even individuals face micro-commons dilemmas. Social media platforms reward outrage and divisiveness. Users, seeking engagement, amplify noise. Together they erode public discourse, creating polluted information ecosystems no single player can clean. Plastic pollution is similar. One straw means little, but billions choke oceans. The haunting realization. The tragedy of the commons isn't just about overuse. It's about systems where the logic of winning guarantees eventual loss. Escaping requires something extraordinary, a shift from competition to stewardship, from finite victories to infinite resilience. But is our species capable of that shift? Perhaps the key lies in understanding the ultimate metagame we're playing, not just as nations or corporations, but as a civilization. Social contract is game. Imagine 7 billion players, each holding a button. Press yours, and you get a reward. But for every button pressed, the temperature of the room rises by 1 degree. At first, no one notices, a few degrees warmer. No big deal, but the buttons keep clicking. Soon the air thickens, crops wither, oceans rise. Now everyone's pressing faster. Not to gain more, but to survive in a room they've made unbearable. This isn't science fiction. It's our civilization's prisoner's dilemma. At its core, the original prisoner's dilemma pits two players against each other, each tempted to defect for personal gain, even though mutual cooperation would bring the best outcome. But scale it up to humanity, and the stakes transform. Nations burn coal to grow economies. Corporations extract resources for shareholders. Individuals drive, fly, consume. Each act rational in isolation. Together, they push planetary systems to the brink. Why don't we cooperate? Because cooperation in this game requires trust on a planetary scale, trust that others will sacrifice too. But history teaches players to be wary. During the Cold War, arms control treaties faltered over fears of hidden arsenals. In trade, nations break agreements if rivals gain unfair advantages. Even in pandemics, countries hoarded vaccines, leaving poorer nations waiting. The logic of self-preservation undermines collective survival. Game theory calls this a multiplayer iterated dilemma. If others defect, your restraint achieves nothing. If others cooperate, you're tempted to free ride. Over time, distrust spreads like a virus, pulling everyone into defection spirals. This isn't about villains. It's about systems that reward short-term thinking. Politicians prioritize elections. Companies prioritize quarterly earnings. Even individuals prioritize convenience over consequences. And yet, there are cracks of hope. The Montreal Protocol, which phased out ozone-depleting chemicals, succeeded because players saw immediate, shared benefits. Global nuclear treaties have, despite flaws, kept arsenals constrained for decades. These victories show that with the right incentives, players can overcome fear and defect less. But for climate change, biodiversity loss, and AI safety, the scale is far larger and time is running shorter. The lesson is stark. The game we're in rewards the wrong moves. If we keep playing by its rules, we all lose. But there's another way. Players can rewrite the rules themselves, not for victory, but for survival. That brings us to a deeper idea. The social contract as a game, where governments and institutions become the referees of cooperation. AI and autonomous agents. A group of strangers stranded on an island discovers a freshwater spring. At first, everyone drinks freely, then one builds a dam, another sets up guards, and soon fights erupt over access. To survive, they gather and draft rules, share water equally, guard it in shifts, punish hoarders. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the first stirrings of a social contract, an agreement to sacrifice some freedom in exchange for order, security, and fairness. Governments, at their core, are players in a game where cooperation must be enforced. Left unchecked, individuals may defect, cheat taxes, break laws, exploit resources. But if rules are clear and enforcement is credible, even self-interested players find cooperation preferable. Thomas Hobbes called life without such rules nasty, brutish, and short. But fairness isn't automatic. In democracies, players expect rules to reflect collective will, but majorities can override minorities, and minorities can obstruct majorities. Each side believes they're fighting for fairness, yet the system risks gridlock. In authoritarian regimes, stability comes at a cost. Players comply not because they agree, but because the penalties for defection are severe. Fear keeps the game running, until it doesn't. Social contracts also evolve. In the industrial era, governments expanded welfare systems to address inequalities that fueled unrest. Labor laws, public education, and healthcare weren't gifts. They were strategic moves to keep the game from collapsing. But today, cracks show. Rising inequality breeds resentment. Distrust in institutions leads players to opt out, forming their own rules, cryptocurrencies, alternative communities, even shadow economies. When enough players stop believing in the fairness of a system, the contract unravels. We see echoes of this in global agreements. Nations promise emissions cuts or arms reductions, but defect when enforcement is weak. Trust becomes the scarcest resource. And yet, when contracts hold, they can transform civilizations. Clean Air Acts revived poisoned cities. Trade alliances turned rivals into partners. Even imperfect systems often outperform chaos. The social contract is a game of delicate balances. Too rigid, and players rebel. Too lenient, and freeriders thrive. Too opaque, and trust evaporates. Maintaining it isn't about perfect fairness. It's about perceived fairness, enough for most players to stay in the game. But as technology creates new kinds of players, ones without human emotions, fatigue, or loyalty, the old contracts may no longer apply. Mechanism Design Redux. For thousands of years, every game on Earth had human players, kings and merchants, generals and farmers, all bound by the same limits: emotion, fatigue, mortality. But now, a new kind of player is entering the arena. One that doesn't sleep, doesn't age, and never tires of calculating. Artificial intelligence isn't just a tool, it's a competitor, a teammate, and sometimes a game master rewriting the rules as it plays. Consider financial markets. Algorithms now execute trades in microseconds, far faster than human reflexes. They aren't just following instructions, they're adapting in real time, exploiting inefficiencies, and in some cases, triggering flash crashes that no one fully understands until after the fact. What happens when human players no longer even see the moves being made? On social media, AI-driven recommendation engines shape information flows, amplifying some voices and silencing others, not through malice, but through optimization. The game becomes invisible, yet players adjust their strategies to fit its contours, chasing likes and shares under the watchful eye of non-human arbiters. In warfare, autonomous drones and cyber systems now make split-second decisions about life and death. A human commander once weighed risk and ethics before pulling a trigger. An AI system, guided only by training data and objectives, may escalate conflicts in ways its creators never intended. The game becomes one of alignment, ensuring these agents' goals don't drift from ours. Even governance is shifting. Governments deploy predictive policing systems, credit scoring algorithms, and automated decision-making tools. Citizens find themselves playing in systems they can't question, judged by code they'll never read. The social contract we explored earlier was between people, but now parts of it are enforced by software, opaque, rigid, and unyielding. AI isn't inherently good or evil. It's a player with different constraints and incentives. Unlike humans, it doesn't fear punishment or crave status. Its strategies emerge from training, optimization, and feedback loops we don't fully grasp. This creates strange new dynamics. In negotiation, AI may act irrationally to appear human or exploit rationality to corner human players. In coordination problems, it could help solve global challenges or amplify collective failures by scaling bad incentives at speed. Game theory highlights the core problem. These agents don't experience the game as we do. They lack stakes in its survival. They don't care if the commons collapses, if the social contract unravels, or if trust evaporates, so the burden falls on us. To design systems where these new players reinforce cooperation instead of eroding it. To set objectives that align with human values, not just technical success. Because once autonomous agents play at scale, it may no longer be humans setting the rules. And that raises a haunting question. Can we still design the game itself, or are we becoming pieces on someone else's board? The game of life. Most players enter a game and learn its rules. Few ask who wrote them or why. But what if you could set the rules yourself, choose the incentives, design the payoffs, even shape the choices players see? This is mechanism design, game theory flipped inside out. Instead of predicting behavior within systems, it builds systems to steer behavior. At its simplest, mechanism design is everywhere. Speed limits shape driving habits. Taxes discourage smoking. Subsidies encourage renewable energy. Players respond to these incentives like pieces following gravity on a tilted board. But when the board spans the entire planet, the stakes rise. Consider climate agreements. Rather than pleading for goodwill, mechanism design creates carbon markets. Emit less, and you can sell your unused quota. Emit more, and you pay others. Suddenly, conservation isn't altruism, it's profitable. The Montreal Protocol used a similar approach decades ago. By aligning incentives, it phased out CFCs and healed the ozone layer. Proof that well-designed systems can work at global scale. Yet not every design succeeds. In financial markets, poorly constructed incentives led traders to chase short-term profits, sparking crises. In social media, algorithms optimized for engagement, rewarding outrage, conspiracy, and division. These are cautionary tales, systems that rewarded the wrong moves. But what makes a design good? It isn't fairness alone. It's robustness, resilience to cheating, gaming, and collapse. It's transparency, so players trust the rules. And it's adaptability, because no system survives a changing world unless it evolves. Designers also face paradoxes. Too rigid, and players rebel. Too flexible, and bad actors exploit loopholes. The art lies in balance. In nature, we see this too. Ecosystems evolve rules through trial and error, predator-prey balances, cooperative symbioses, competitive exclusions. Those that fail collapse. Those that succeed endure. Perhaps mechanism design isn't just a human endeavor. Perhaps it's the essence of life. Systems finding ways to sustain themselves through countless iterations. But humans face a unique challenge. We don't just want to survive. We want justice, dignity, freedom. Designing systems that deliver all three requires wisdom, not just clever engineering. Because once rules are set, they shape generations. A flawed design can lock players into cycles of conflict, inequality, or decay. So the question becomes, not just can we design systems, it's can we design better ones than the ones we inherited? And deeper still, are we even the designers, or are we players believing we hold the pen while unseen forces script the game around us? Escaping bad games. From the moment you were born, you were placed on a board you didn't design. Your name, your language, your culture, your era. These weren't choices, they were starting positions. You learned the rules of your family, then your school, then your society. Some rules were explicit: stop at red lights, pay taxes. Others were invisible, enforced not by laws, but by stares, whispers, and expectations. At first you thought you were just learning to play. Then one day, a quieter question arose. Am I even a player, or just another piece being moved? Game theory often assumes players are rational actors, making choices to maximize outcomes. But step back far enough, and the assumption cracks. How much of what you want is truly your own? Advertisers shape desires. Algorithms feed you information that nudges decisions. Even emotions, pride, fear, love, are ancient evolutionary scripts, honed to keep genes in play rather than individuals fulfilled. In biology, you're part of a game larger than yourself. Your cells cooperate and compete, following rules encoded in DNA. Organisms live, reproduce, and die, not for victory, but to keep the game of life running. Some philosophers argue this is true of societies too. Institutions don't exist for people. People exist to sustain institutions. Players think they're moving pieces, but often they're being moved to preserve systems far beyond their understanding. Yet history complicates the picture. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. Galileo pointed a telescope skyward. Gandhi chose nonviolence. These weren't pieces following rules. They were players rewriting them. So perhaps it's not a binary. Perhaps every human oscillates between being a player and a piece. At times we act with agency, shaping the game around us. At others we react, pushed by forces too vast to resist. In your own life, Consider the patterns. Do you choose your career, or did a web of economic pressures, family expectations, and random events steer you there? Do you cultivate your values, or were they planted and pruned by your culture? These aren't easy questions, but asking them is itself a player's move. And if enough players awaken to the structure of the game, they can do something remarkable. Not just play better, but question whether the rules themselves are worth keeping. Because there are bad games, zero-sum traps, systems that exploit more than they reward, and the ultimate act of agency may be finding ways to escape them. Why game theory changes everything. Imagine you're in a room with 99 other players. Every minute, a bell rings. Each player must choose, press a button for personal reward or abstain. But if too many press, the room's oxygen drops slightly. At first, everyone restrains themselves. But as minutes pass and rewards grow tempting, buttons light up faster, the air thins. Players panic. Some keep pressing, hoping to survive just a little longer. The game ends, not with a winner, but with silence. This isn't fiction. It's the shape of many real-world systems. Climate change, financial crises, social media outrage cycles. Each rewards individual action while punishing collective outcomes. And yet players rarely ask the obvious question, what if we stopped playing? Game theory often assumes fixed rules. Players act within them trying to win. But what happens when the game itself becomes toxic? Prisoners don't just have to cooperate. They can conspire to break the prison walls. History offers glimpses of this. The abolition of slavery wasn't just a shift in player strategy. It rewrote the game's rules about human value. Universal suffrage expanded the circle of players with agency. Labor movements forced industries to create safety nets instead of exploiting endless toil. Each change seemed impossible until players acted as if it wasn't. But escaping bad games isn't simple. Powerful players often benefit most from keeping rules as they are. Economic systems lock people into debt traps. Political systems reward division and gridlock. Algorithms amplify anger because outrage drives clicks. The first step is recognizing these dynamics, not as random misfortunes, but as designed incentives that could be redesigned. Some thinkers propose radical rewrites, universal basic income to end scarcity traps, carbon pricing to align environmental survival with profit motives, global digital constitutions to tame unaccountable tech platforms. But these proposals face resistance, not just from elites, but from players habituated to the current rules. Change feels dangerous even when the status quo is deadly. On a personal level, escaping bad games means noticing where you're playing without reflection. Are you climbing ladders you didn't choose, fighting battles that leave no one whole, chasing victories in systems that reward only exhaustion? Agency begins by asking, what would life look like if I stopped playing to win and started playing to change? Of course, not all games are bad. Some reward creativity, cooperation, and growth. The key is learning to tell the difference and having the courage to leave when the cost of staying outweighs the gain. Because in the end, rewriting the rules isn't about utopia, it's about survival. Step back for a moment. From the smallest microbe to the largest civilizations, every system you've encountered in this journey has shared one thing: players, moves, payoffs, markets, and marriages, wars, and wildlife, social media, and science. All in their own way are games. But understanding them isn't about memorizing strategies. It's about seeing the invisible forces shaping behavior, the incentives, feedback loops, and hidden rules that decide who thrives, who suffers, and who survives. The coworker who hoards credit isn't just selfish, they're playing a finite game for reputation. The nation hoarding vaccines isn't purely cruel, it's trapped in a prisoner's dilemma at scale. The platform amplifying outrage isn't malevolent, it's optimizing for a payoff you didn't agree to. Game theory turns the world inside out, revealing patterns beneath chaos. But it also raises harder questions. If we're all players, do we truly have agency, or are we just acting out strategies written by biology, culture, and code? And if we're pieces, who's moving us? The algorithms, the systems, the unconscious drives in our own minds? Yet here's the hopeful twist. Game theory doesn't just expose the games, it gives you tools to play better and to play differently. It teaches that cooperation often beats competition, that trust can emerge even among rivals, that designing fair systems matters as much as playing fair within them. It whispers that the smartest players aren't those who win at all costs, but those who leave the board better than they found it. So perhaps the real aha moment isn't about finding perfect strategies. It's realizing there are no final victories, only moves that ripple outward, shaping games you'll never see, and realizing you're not just a player, you're also a designer, a referee, a mentor for future players. Every choice writes rules, sets examples, defines what others believe is possible. In the end, the world isn't made of winners and losers. It's made of games we inherit and games we create. The question isn't how to win. It's what kind of game you want to leave behind.